Hello, this is Chris Haskell from They Live by Film. For those that don't know us, Adam, Zach, and we built a podcast over the last 2 years that's a combination of film discussion from 3 very different perspectives, as well as industry interviews with the leaders in boutique Blu-ray and 4K community. We started with Dev Crocodile, but over time we've been lucky enough to speak with Arrow Video, Severin, Mondo Macabro, Vinegar Syndrome, Radiance, Indicator, most of the OCN partner labels. It's been a blast. You can find us wherever you podcast, and also actually recently as part of Someone's Favorite Production Podcast Network. We hope to see you online.
Hello there, and welcome back to The Disconnected. I'm here with Damian Lahey, who is a filmmaker that you're probably going to be hearing quite a bit about over these next couple of months after this Severin Summer Sale and everything that is happening with them. Damian, thank you so much for choosing to do this.
Well, thanks a lot for having me, Ryan. I really appreciate it. I am ready to mix it up and talk, all things. I'm just looking forward to going down memory lane with my, with my own journey over the years. I'm going to be dating myself, so everybody listening to this should know that that's going to be coming as we talk about my own kind of relationship with physical media, movies over the last couple of decades.
Yeah, one of the big things is while you're listening to this, you might hear some audio quirks, and I might have some extra editing on this episode because you happen to be in Karachi. Can you tell me what you're doing over there right now?
Yeah, so I'm in Karachi, Pakistan right now. I'm actually going to be doing some spots for UNICEF, and I'm doing that in conjunction with a university here. I'm doing that in conjunction with the university here. So nice. I got a grant, etc. So that's what I'm doing here. It is incredibly hot, as you can imagine.
I've been complaining about how humid it is here in Missouri, but I can't imagine Pakistan in the middle of summer is super comfortable right now.
Yeah, it's been brutal.
With being over in Pakistan, what is some of the things that has been challenging other than the heat for you, getting used to everything over there?
Well, first off, I want to talk about a glowing positive, and that is Karachi has possibly the best food that I've ever had in my life. And nice. Any and everything you've heard about Karachi cuisine being the best on the planet is absolutely true. There's every meal I'm blown away. There is no. I mean, it's almost like I'm without words when it comes to how good the food is here. You know what I mean? I've had the best fried chicken of my life. I've had the best smash burgers of my life. I've had every time that I have a meal, it's like magic. So I want to just put over the cuisine here like nobody's business. And they also have this thing called Food Panda. Okay. So Food Panda, you know how we have the Uber Eats and the DoorDash?
Yeah.
Well, for a fraction of the cost, but 20 times the efficiency, you can literally get anything and everything delivered within an hour.
Amazing.
Not just food too, but appliances, whatever you might need. Obviously, there's been some in regard to, this is an entirely different culture. This is not, going to Paris. This is not going to London. You know what I mean? This is definitely this is a very different culture. Karachi is so some of the I would say, obviously I'm working in conjunction with the university. Nobody should visit here unless they're in some sort of official capacity. Right. But everybody here has been very nice. There's just been if I'm being honest, the only kind of hiccups have been just in some of the language barrier in regards to some of the housing stuff.
Right. So getting back into it, we've got a lot to talk about. Obviously, you mentioned physical media. Could you just overall, what's your history with film? Did you grow up loving film?
Well, I'm going to take this opportunity, Ryan, to shine a huge spotlight on Video Magic in Jacksonville Beach, Florida.
Nice.
Without which I would not have the knowledge, the passion that I have today for movies. That place was like film school before I went to film school. Now, look, at the end of the day, it all begins with the with the genuine, the interest for it, right?
Right.
And then pretty much anybody that's into movies or that gets into music or literature, if they find themselves into something, what do? They pick up a biography, right? And they read a biography on the subject, and that's gonna, talk about the influences of that person, and that's going to lead them down other roads, and et cetera, et cetera. I remember the first Bob Dylan biography that I read, Behind the Shades, when I was like in middle school, and that opened me up to the Beats and all sorts of stuff. You know what I mean? So it's like that with movies as well. But, Video Magic was amazing because they had everything from Kurosawa, Fellini, Meatballs movies. They had all the 80s raunchy comedies. They had all the foreign stuff. Antonioni, they had all the new releases of the day, but they also had, they had lots of horror movies. And then, of course, once you got older into like junior and, you were like a senior in high school, you'd go to the back where they had the like 70s exploitation stuff,
Amazing.
So, but that video store, so I was always like a raging cinephile from a very young age, loved movies. And, I would go through phases, right, where I would, I'd watch like a Woody Allen movie, and then I'd want to watch all of his movies, or Alfred Hitchcock. You know what I mean? Things like that.
Yeah, of course.
And, a lot of us of that generation, you're my age, right?
I'm mid-30s.
All right. Well, I'm 10 years older than you. So like for a common thing for our generation was that like the parents restricted the R-rated movies pretty heavily. So like you weren't allowed to watch, so like many of us weren't allowed to watch R-rated movies. And then, we could only watch them if they were on television where they had all the bad stuff cut out, right?
Right.
So, but like once you got into middle school, the parents pretty much gave up on that, and they'd go to the video store with the kids, and because you're at that age where the kids are all wanting to do sleepovers and stuff, and they want to watch horror movies or they want to watch raunchy R-rated comedies because they want to see topless chicks or whatever. You know what I mean? And I mean,
right.
A lot of people don't understand that about those movies then, but that was you didn't have the internet. You didn't have the internet with tons of like graphic sexual content that you could access for free 24 hours a day.
Of course.
Right? You know what I mean? Like when you would get into high school, you would have like, some kids would steal like porno tapes from their like dads and, pass it around.
But like the that classic was like finding magazines buried in the forest or something. Yeah.
Ryan, you are spot on. So, that was that was how that was marketable.
Right.
Like that drew audiences to those movies, was that they promised that kind of, those kind of thrills. You know what I mean?
Of course.
And, being kids that didn't have access to that. You know, that was definitely a draw of some of those movies. You know what I mean? I mean, it wasn't the only thing. We also wanted to watch good movies, but that was certainly, you know, a thing. And
Right.
so we started, you know, we would, you know, once we, you know, Video Magic had all those like Eye of the Eagle, those cheesy action movies by that Santiago guy that Tarantino loves. I mean, it had all the like Fulci Gates of Hell. You know what I mean? It had all like, and you know, Beyond the Darkness by Joe D'Amato, you know. So once we got into that stuff in like middle school, and I actually wrote an entire article about the first time that we all had a sleepover, and like we rented Beyond the Darkness, not knowing anything about it and not having seen anything like that in our lives.
Oh,
and like
man.
we just sat there in complete silence, like staring at the screen. But after that, and by the way, for all those listening, Severin has a great edition of that available.
Great Blu-ray.
But yes. And so that pretty much started the like floodgates, right? So then you would have like sleepovers, and they had a theme. Right. So we would have friends over, and we'd have barbecue, and we'd watch like we'd watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies. Right.
Amazing.
Or we'd rent all the like Death Stalker movies and have a Chinese feast. You know what I mean? And so that was kind of, and you know, Dawn of the Dead, right? Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, those were huge.
Oh yeah.
And keep in mind though that like when we were watching like a Dawn of the Dead, then like you couldn't tell, like right now everybody recognizes Dawn of the Dead as a classic American movie, like not just a great horror movie, like it's a classic movie.
Right.
But like no, like parents didn't believe that. I mean like you would get pushback if you tried to like legitimately say Dawn of the Dead was a great movie, because it wasn't recognized as one.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like even by critics. Time. You know, and so, but that led to when later when I was in high school, you know, Suspiria, the letterbox version of Suspiria was on the new releases display at Video Magic, right? And I had never heard of that movie. And to be honest, like I didn't think it looked that interesting on the cover, but letterbox videos were such a rare thing then, and especially to rent a letterbox video.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I had to get it. And that was like a life changer, you know, because keep in mind at that point, you know, video collecting, like I was on the Columbia House tip. You know,
I was on Columbia House.
Yep. Columbia House, baby. You know it. I was on the Columbia House tip, and you know, like my main thing had been like collecting all the Marx the Brothers movies.
Nice.
You know, and I had like a bunch of Monty Python, and you know, I had a bunch of like, you know, the kind of standard stuff, and like the only like letterbox movie I had that was 2001: A Space Odyssey.
That's a big one.
And if I remember though, I'm pretty sure Spartacus was letterboxed. And I had some Ben-Hur set where like the chariot race scene was letterboxed, even though the rest wasn't, which I thought was like so cheesy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's lame. That's weak.
Like some of those films nowadays that switch to IMAX aspect ratio just for a couple scenes and then go back.
Right. So I mean, you know, but you couldn't tell, like people didn't understand. People were ignorant about the formats back then. So like if you went to somebody's house and they had a Laserdisc player, like kids would make fun of that as a cheaper format.
Oh man.
You know what I mean? Because
we didn't know what we had.
VHS. You know? And
yeah.
So, but you know, you had to go to, you know, keep in mind that like you had to go to these video stores and rent these movies like to discover like Once Upon a Time in America is the great movie that it is. right? I mean, you weren't going to
course.
find. I mean, but a Video Magic had the foreign stuff. Had Zhang's movies. Had all sorts of stuff like that.
Well,
I remember renting Judo from there. The scent of green papaya. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Germinal. That World War II variation they did of Les Miserables. Do you remember that?
I think so. Yeah. God, that was. I'm trying to think about what year that was, because my family, for some reason, was not huge on musicals, but my dad loved Les Mis, and I swear I've seen probably every iteration growing up. And so
that one's a drama. That one's a World War II drama with no singing.
Right.
Yes.
That story was just something that spoke to him for some reason, but that's a weird tangent. With Video Magic, one thing that a lot of people don't really hit on nowadays that we've lost with this video store era, I got to ask about your person, because most of us that grew up in that era, we had at least one person that you were maybe not like close friends with, but they would be the clerk at these video stores that would be like, hey, Damian, I know you, I know what you like. We just got this in, and I think you're going to love it. And it's something that we have crucially lost in 2024, because nowadays we're relying on algorithms and hoping that Netflix does this right for people. And the world is so different that you're not going to be able to discover some of these classics that you're bringing up that, when you were 13 years old and finding foundational films for you in your home video store, where are we going to get that sort of an opportunity for the future generations?
Well, here's the thing is that, a lot of it, my guide was video movie guides.
Yeah.
But there were a couple, the owner and the manager of Video Magic were definitely helpful in me pointing out stuff to me. You know what I mean? Like, oh man, you're on an Argento kick. We got the church in. You know what I mean? I remember that specifically, and going and getting the church. But a lot of times I would just, once I saw Suspiria, I went ahead and went to the movie guide and looked up his name and saw all the movies that he directed, and then went to the video store and tried to find them. And actually what's funny is that, we've got to mention, of course, Phenomena in there. But what's funny, though, is that the first video store that we ever frequented as a family in Manchester, Connecticut, only had one poster in the entire store. And it was a mega poster, like a huge, like the ones that were like double the size of a normal 27 by 40. It was this mega poster for Creepers. And I used to tell my my parents that it was like, that it was like really scary. I thought it was scary. And years later, when I, after I started getting into Argento, after I saw Suspiria and, Demons, and, I started digging through his filmography, and Creepers was at the store, and I saw the box, and I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen this artwork since that video store in Connecticut all those years ago. So that was wild. And that's a crazy movie. And it's very borderlines on silly. But it's aged extremely well, because it ventures into that like gonzo territory, but it still has that artistic style to it. So again, we had mentioned the Broken Mirrors, Broken Minds book by Maitland McDonough. I hope that I pronounced that name correctly. Talking about just that very, very unique, stylish tone, that combination of elements, that wild alchemy that only Argento could kind of create. And the same with Sam Peckinpah. I consider Peckinpah and Argento kind of very similar. You know what I mean? They had very much like they had very signature styles that when they came together, just in that way. Like it couldn't be duplicated, and they had a hard time duplicating it themselves. You know what I mean? But when you look at Argento's films and just that, you know, that run, right, of like good to great films, like he has very many. Like, so if you have like Bird with the Crystal Plumage, you have like Cat o' Nine Tails, right? You have Profundo Rosso, you have Suspiria, you have Phenomena, you have Tenebrae, you have Opera. You know what I mean? I've never been a big fan of Inferno, but a lot of people consider that as part of his, like, you know, his like great run, you know. And then you had, you know, his segment of Two Evil Eyes, which is very good. And then so that's like a very, so when you were our generation, you know, getting into Argento before, you know, the kind of like fall off in quality. Like, I mean, you were coming into Argento, and it was literally just, you were picking up on just this fantastic run, where it was like almost the majority of his filmography was like awesome. You know, I mean, again, it was either good to like great, you know. And actually, speaking of, I know Severin did a release of it. And I'm not sure if David Gregory sent it to me in a gift package. I think he did, but I still to this day have not seen Four Flies on Grey Velvet. Yeah, I have not seen, like, that's one that really disappeared. There was a lot of that going on. Like, okay, like I saw, like, you know, when I was about 11 years old, and I had never seen a Clint Eastwood movie, and like Two Mules for Sister Sarah came on HBO one afternoon.
Right. And
I was like, oh my God. Like, I've never seen anybody this fucking cool in my life. Like, I mean, it was just like, I mean, it was like jaw dropping. I was just like, I can't believe that this guy is that, like, you know, like before I was like Harrison Ford. You know what I mean? Because like our generation was obsessed with him, and it was a big deal whenever he had a movie coming out and stuff. It was huge. A lot of people today will never understand what a huge deal Harrison Ford was. But like, you know, but again, so then, you know, you've got Clint Eastwood, right? And then, you know, but with somebody like him, you know, you would be going to the video store and renting the movies that they weren't playing on cable, right?
Right.
So like what a lot of people don't understand is how much commercial cable raised people in regards to their film education.
Oh yeah.
Right. So like the reason that like Kurt Russell is so well known to people from all walks of life is that like he was literally the king of commercial television, like for decades. Like The Thing, when I was in 6th grade, The Thing was on TV every week. You know what I mean? Like he had so many movies in rotation like that. It was like The Thing, and he had this terrible movie with Robin Williams that even got a lot of play. The Mean Season was on like every other week. And then, you know, and then he had, what was that? Overboard was on every other week on, you know.
Overboard was always on.
And then you had, you know, Executive Decision is like one of the biggest smash hits on commercial television ever. You know what I mean? And then Breakdown. Like you can find, like, I mean, to this day, those movies, like if you're flipping through the channels, you will find them. You know what I mean? Like Kurt Russell was just like the king of commercial television. And so many of his movies were played, and then ones that got played out got replaced by new ones. And he was never a big guy at the box office. Like he wasn't lighting it up at the box office, but like kids loved Big Trouble in Little China.
I think I've seen Big Trouble in Little China on TNT probably 45 times in my life.
Yeah. Like, you know how Mark Singer had Beastmaster?
Oh yeah.
That was like the biggest like cable TV hit of all time. Well, like Kurt Russell had like 8 Beastmasters. You know what I'm saying? So
Too
like
true. Lots of Disney titles too.
Yeah. So Kurt Russell had this huge like shelf life, because like I remember years later people would say, you know, oh man, they were like, you know, Kurt Russell's a lucky guy because like his movies don't do so hot at the box office. And I'm like, yeah, but like they're like smash hits on commercial like television. Like we can't escape Kurt Russell on TV, you know? And so like with guys like that, you know, you would go to the video store and rent the ones that weren't readily available on TV. So like, for example, Clint Eastwood, you would have to go to the video store to rent Honky Tonk Man, right? You would have to go to the video store and rent Bird. You'd have to go to the video store and rent, you know, Tightrope, right? So like you would like fill in those gaps, you know? And so, but when I saw, you know, Terror at the Opera, right? We're gonna tie this back to the Argento thing.
Yeah.
But I do have been an aside about something, because they release for like Demons and you know, Zombie by Lucio Fulci. They release a new box set for these movies like every 6 months.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And I will say this about Demons, is that shortly after I saw Suspiria, this is like a pet peeve story. Shortly after I saw Suspiria, I had a friend spend the night, and we went to the mall. My mom took us to the mall, and we went to Suncoast Video, okay? And which is where I got a lot of my stuff, especially in college. Film school is when I got more stuff from Suncoast Video. But Suncoast Video had a movie called Demons. And it said Dario Argento presents Demons. And it had this suspended in air illustration of a demon hand holding an entire film audience in it.
Classic.
It's one of the best covers for a movie I've ever seen, and a fucking poster for a horror movie.
Yep.
And they don't use it on any of the releases. They use this tacky shot of the people coming through the fog.
Yeah, it's so overused.
Yeah, or they use the image of that stupid looking demon head.
Yep.
Which it actually works within the context of the movie, but it doesn't work as the cover of the thing.
Not at all.
And I'm like, how come you can't get that artwork? And here's what's funny, Ryan, is that like, I don't know why I get like this, but like I've actually I've not purchased it because it doesn't have that artwork, because it like bugs me. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And then I was kind of bothered when I think was it Arrow? And by the way, Arrow do wonderful stuff. Okay, I'm not dragging anybody. Arrow do wonderful stuff. I've got a lot of their discs. Okay, but when they did that release where they like paired the second one with it,
right?
Because they were kind of like, you know, we know which one's going to be moving units. Right, so they tried to get you to get. they tried to get you to get that second one along with it. I was like, I don't think so. but so anyway, so that was actually my second Dario Argento. Now nice. I don't know if you know this though, but again, because you're younger than me, but like, you know, I started to get really into his films, right? And, I picked up Broken Mirrors, Broken Minds by Maitland McDonough. And, I saw Terror at the Opera, Unsane. Tenebrae was Unsane on video. Yeah. But here's the deal, though, is that, I started getting really into them. And I would sometimes spend the summers in Connecticut with my grandmother. And she knew Cat O' Nine Tails.
Interesting.
And the reason is that, Cat O' Nine Tails was rated PG. It was in public domain. And it starred Carl Malden, who was like huge with that generation.
Right.
Like he was super big with the Murder, She Wrote generation. Because he had multiple movies that appealed to that generation that like he didn't necessarily star in, but he co-starred in. And they were always on TV for that older generation. And he had like this huge run. I forget what I want to say American Express. It's something like that. American Express or Traveler's Checks, like commercials.
Right.
And so Cat O' Nine Tails actually got a lot of television play. Like my grandmother had seen that one like a couple of times.
Interesting.
And for years though, once the like video, like selling kind of like reached a crescendo, I can't tell you the amount of times that I would be at CVS or like Walgreens, or I would be at the grocery store, and they'd have like all those like standard play, whatever, those standard play, like cheap VHS tapes for like $5.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah.
And Cat O' Nine Tails would be in there like all the time.
I will try to share this with the viewers. I just found something I want to share with you. Somebody mocked up a fake Arrow cover for Demons. Look at that.
Yes. Thank you, Ryan. That whoever did that, props to you. Like that's the set. Hey, I would have bought that with Demons too.
Right.
without blinking twice, I would have bought that, and I would have been cool with them, sliding some Demons 2 on me. I would have been cool with it if they had that artwork. Oh maybe man, someday. That's one of my maybe in 6 months when they release another box set for it.
Yeah,
you know what perfect. I mean?
Well, I mean that's a good transition too with all these films that we grew up loving. How are you feeling seeing some of these literally like better presented than they've ever been seen before? Are there any that have really blown your mind over the last couple of years?
You know what? I'm so glad you asked me this question. Here's the bottom line. Okay, a lot of people are going to bristle when I say this. The best way a movie will ever look to you is the first time you watched it and fell in love with it.
I love you so much for saying that. That is such a perfect response.
I can't tell you the amount of, even if you had like a big TV when you were coming up in my age, if you had a bigger TV or like a larger one, it wasn't large enough to really do any movie justice.
Right.
But when I was in film school, man, and when I was in film school and in my dorm room, I had a 13-inch TV that had a VCR. I can't tell you the amount of movies that I watched that, that's the best. That's the best way that I've ever seen them. And then when I walk away from it, Ryan, when I look back on them, I see them as looking great. So years later, when I watch like a restored version, all I say to myself is, you know what? That's definitely, I bet, not how it looked when I first saw it. But in my memories afterwards, that's how I saw it as.
Wow.
You know what I mean? So when I see, I'm so glad you touched on this, because when I see people say stuff like, when I see posts, on social media and, the cinemaniacs, and some of them say stuff like, but I can say with absolute certainty that you have not seen this movie before. You know what I mean? Like, you can't say you've seen this movie unless you get this new version of it. You know what I mean? And when I see stuff like that, I just kind of, I got to be honest, Ryan, I kind of roll my eyes. Like, I don't see it. I don't see it. And especially, when it's, when it's Demons 2, you know what I mean? And look, it's really hard to get a film made. So, it's really hard to get a film made. So I respect anybody that can get over been in this business, but I don't see how, like if I was to watch a restored and remastered version of some of these movies, that, it's going to be like a whole different story for me. It just isn't, it's just not from where I'm coming from,
Right. The only thing I think is really changed by some of these is when the first time you saw it was I'm not trying to speak for you, but one of those awful VHS pan and scans where a lot of the time you couldn't even see 2/3 of the movie.
Right. Like, I agree with, again, though, the first time I watched The Exorcist when I was young, and a perfect example of what I'm talking about in regard to the best time that you first fell in love with a movie is the best time that you'll ever see it is, I'm going to go back with this one. And years ago in Connecticut, I was probably 9 years old, and we went to my parents had these friends, and we went to their house. It was Jenny Rizzo's house. She was the same age as me. And while the parents all hung out and played cards and, did whatever upstairs, Jenny and I were downstairs in the basement with the lights off, and we watched The Warriors. All right. And nothing will ever equal that experience, that viewing of that film. And, we were in Connecticut. So that was the New York that we kind of knew, and kind of heard, whispers about how New York could be dangerous. Nothing will replicate that first time seeing that movie under those circumstances. And that's a movie that I resisted revisiting because I didn't want that memory of it spoiled, that feeling it gave me. Like I was there on some late night, adventure in the city, with no parents, nobody, just being young and wild. And I finally, years later, got like the director's cut of that had this like cartoon stuff added to it. Of course, you're not going to recreate the memory, right? That great memory of seeing that movie the first time. The comic book stuff in there, I didn't think that helped the movie. And that's something about these kind of releases, whether they're by a boutique or by the studio, the director's cut thing. Obviously you have the famous director's cut, like Once Upon a Time in America, right? Which absolutely, that has a huge backstory behind it, and obviously the director's cut is superior. But then you have other examples where it's not so superior. And I think an example of that, for example, is Amadeus. I don't think that director's cut is better than the theatrical. And in some cases, I don't appreciate it when the director's cut is the only thing that's available. You know what I mean? Obviously, you have things where the David Fincher approved assembly of Alien 3, while not 100% finished, I find that to be a far superior movie than what the studio released, even though I've always kind of enjoyed that film more than others have, but I don't think that all the time the director's cut has been is an improvement, or rather the uncut version. So here's another thing, just to take this back, just to use an example of the cult and horror stuff, since that's kind of what we've been talking about here. The Night Evelyn Came from the Grave is a perfect example of this. Is that I grew up, the version of that I saw, and there's been a bazillion different cuts of that movie, but I saw a very tight, version of that movie that was probably like, that was about 5 to 7 minutes shorter, and it was a much tighter film. It was a really enjoyable gothic horror Italian thing that was a twist on the giallo. It was very unique, very much set itself apart from a lot of that stuff that was being made. That was more, just a lot of movies that were copying the bird with the crystal plumage kind of deal. And, when Arrow released that uncut version, I got it. And, I watched it, and I'm sorry. Look, I appreciate naked women as much as the next guy, but all that additional footage just made it a soggier, slower movie. Like, it didn't improve it. And I remember, mentioning that on a thread with some other cinemaniacs when we were talking about that, release, and a lot of other folks jumped in and they were like, yeah, I prefer the tighter cut version that I saw. So it's not always, these director's cuts like The Warrior, the Warriors, and Night Everyone Came from the Grave, Amadeus, some of these, there's a good reason why some things were cut out of them. So I prefer that for academic reasons, if there's a director's cut, you can have a director's cut. And then you should also have the option of seeing the theatrical cut, especially when there's no controversy where it's like, this is the version that you were meant to see. Man, if it's literally just the novelty of, oh, here's the director's cut before he approved the theatrical version, which was the successful version, the way they position it in that context, in my opinion, matters. And I just think that, look, obviously when it's a movie like Amadeus, which is a stone cold classic, I don't know if this is the same for you, but that was a substitute teacher's favorite when I was growing up. Because, you know what I mean? Every substitute teacher, would go ahead and put in Amadeus for the students. It was either Amadeus or it was those Edgar Allan Poe, Roger Corman productions. You know what I mean? But I think that, and I'm not sure if that set Amadeus has the theatrical as well. But I think that, the option should always be there, unless for some crazy reason it's the director has this vendetta and it's like, I never want the theatrical version shown. I just want my director's cut out there as soon as possible. And I would have liked to have seen on the Night Evelyn Came from the Grave disc, I would have liked to have seen one of the shorter versions, because like me and some other peers were talking about, you know what? So it didn't have the more exploitive, sexual stuff in it. All right. It was a tighter, better movie in our opinion. They didn't just make those cuts because it was nudity. They also made those cuts because it made it a better film. And I mean, Caligula is, that is something that in my opinion, I've seen some version of it that was released years ago on a video. And for those that found that a fascinating story, like the production of it and all of that, I'm glad that that's available, and especially it's good. I read an interview with the lead actor, McDowell, right? And he was talking about how glad he was to finally see that. So I'm really glad that that's available for, for those folks. You know what I mean? That's a phenomenon that I never really latched into. But for fans of that, I'm certainly glad it's available, because it does have a lot of fans. Look, there's some movies that are actually better. And I was actually having this conversation with a buddy of mine the other day who has seen the same version of this movie that I did. We're talking about Caddyshack. And
nice.
And he was in that. I can. That's top 25 comedies of all time for me easily. But I was like, the television version, the edited television version, that cuts out a couple scenes that are just not funny. is the better, tighter version of the movie.
Right.
And and years later, and I must have seen that movie I would wear out that, because back then we taped a lot of movies off television, and I must have worn that friggin' thing out, like that in my tape with, okay, here's something for everybody. I'm almost ashamed to admit this, Ryan. I have seen Dirty Harry the Enforcer over 35 times. How is that fucking possible? So but that version of Caddyshack, and then when I years later, when I got it on DVD and I watched it, and it had these scenes added, right?
It's a completely different movie.
It wasn't different. It wasn't different. I mean, it was a little bit different, but it was worse because the two scenes, the Dookie scene in the swimming pool is completely not funny. It's so badly done, and the television version doesn't have that scene in the movie, not because it's obscene, but for length and commercial reasons.
Right.
But there's another scene too, but the movie is a better movie without those scenes. But it's great because I was talking to somebody time flies. I think it was 2 years ago, but somebody else on a thread was like, yeah, the commercial television version, the edit is actually better than the movie. So there's stuff like that too, and we're going to talk about that with The Thing, because when I first saw The Thing, the version that I saw, because that movie was on, as we discussed, that movie got a lot of TV play.
Oh yeah.
But that movie, the version that I saw, right after the scene with McCready and what's his name?
Childs.
The other guy. Yeah, when McCready and Childs have their little eerie kind of discussion to see maybe one of them's the Thing.
Right.
Well, the TV version that I first saw, after that scene, there's a shot of the next morning, and a dog, the same dog from the beginning of the movie, is running away through the snow.
Mm, yeah.
Have you ever seen that version?
I may, again, just like you, I've seen it so many times. It sounds familiar, but they all sort of run together over the years.
So that, but that version didn't get as many screenings as other versions of the film. Like John Carpenter changed his mind, but as well, because we're talking about physical media and film and all this, and we're talking about John Carpenter. That he actually shot stuff for the TV version of Halloween.
Oh yeah.
Right. So when you would buy these, and that kind of leads to some issues, because if you think it's a better movie with those scenes, you're kind of screwed because they weren't shot to seamlessly be placed in the actual movie. So when you get like a special edition of Halloween, like you can't watch the movie with them in it, with those TV scenes in the movie. You have to watch them separately, right?
Oh yeah.
So anyway,
most of the time
we
don't get those copies licensed for home video for anything. Some of these boutiques have been able to do it, but it seems like seems like a lot of the studios are anti going down that path because usually they have to get everybody to sign off. But man, so many of us, like you were saying, we grew up with these very specific versions. And I don't know about you, but there's so many things I watched so many times, or like burn CDs in that era of our lives that we were burning everything to CDs. I just have this mindset where a certain movie follows another movie because I watch them back to back on a homemade VHS 900 times, or a burn CD. If I hear one song, in my mind, the next song is one that I had on a CD that I made when I was 15 years old and I listened to 4,000 times. And so those tracks are like intrinsically linked for a lot of us.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a good point. You know, I still remember, what would like Little Big Man was on one of those tapes that I had from television that I watched a bazillion times,
Yeah.
And, but when you got into physical media, when you got into movies later on down the road, right? I'm talking about the like late 90s.
Right.
So the late 90s, Ryan, is when there was a lot of remastered widescreen stuff being released. Okay.
Finally.
And what happened was that a lot of companies too were realizing that this cult horror market was huge.
Yeah.
There was a lot of money there. Okay. Like there's not a lot of, I'm sure for the studios, it stings then a little bit, but there's, Oscar winning dramas that can't sell as much as Friday the 13th Part 4. And haven't been able to sell as well as Friday the 13th Part 4 for decades. Right? So you have this kind of you have this kind of strange karma, right? Where you have like Paramount, for example, was subsidizing all these A-list celebrity dramas that flopped with the profits they made from Star Trek and Friday the 13th. Yep. Which they were embarrassed by and didn't think were cool because they couldn't walk a red carpet with Meryl Streep and Jack Nicholson, right? But yes. Jack Nicholson's one of my favorite actors. Love Big Jack. But all these years later, is it like The Accused with Jodie Foster? And do you see that lighting it up on the boutique label circuit? No.
Not at all.
None of those movies can even get a release because, the audience that they made them for doesn't buy movies.
Right.
You know what I mean? So what I find interesting is, obviously these boutique labels are doing pretty good. Kino, look, I just want to say something about Kino Lorber in particular. And I love Kino. I got a lot of their movies. Okay. But I will say this is that a lot of these studio flops with A-list actors and actresses with them that are being released. There's a lot of cats that are getting a paycheck, working on these releases, doing audio commentaries, trying to reevaluate them as like unappreciated masterpieces.
Right.
And look, sometimes the critics get it wrong, and as time passes, films are reevaluated and they're legitimately like classics, like The Thing, right? but The Thing is the exception, not the rule. You know,
This is true.
some of those movies, if you like the actors, they're good one and done novelty watches. But 99% of the time, I gotta say, the critics got it right the first time. They were 1-star or 2-star movies at best then, and they're 1-star and 2-star movies now. Love John the Belushi, right? What a great development backstory it has. But at the end of the day, The Continental Divide is just not a great movie. It's just not that hot. You know what I mean? And, you know, lots of talented people were kind of like on the outskirts of it, developing it. But, you know, and as much as John, you know, Belushi fans would, you know, God, you know, it would be great if there was another classic to add to the canon. You know what I mean?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
it's just, it's not, you know, it's just not. And look, again, everybody involved in that movie, talented people, right? But sometimes even the talented people, you get them all together, they're going to come up short, you know, when it happens.
Oh,
and there's a lot of duds released by some of these boutique labels. And there's, you know, a lot of people that are working on these things and doing these things, trying to push narratives about the quality of these movies, you know? And I just don't think they're being critical enough. I also feel that way about, you know, I'm surrounded by cinemaniacs that blind buy tons of movies from these boutique labels that do like these exploitation and horror movies. And I've seen most of these movies, right? Right. Because when I first started going to film school, video stores were going out of business. And so I would buy all these like horror collections from these, you know, from these going out of business sales.
For next to nothing, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're going to get more into that after I make this point. But, you know, I see a lot of cinemaniacs, you know, that like pride themselves on being critics, and, you know, not all of them do, but many of them do. But you know, they're blind buying a lot of these exploitation, like horror movies, right?
Oh yeah.
And like, I could count, actually, I don't even think I've seen 3 times one of them say, this movie stank. Like, this was a blind buy and this movie stank. You know what I mean? Like, everyone, like, they blind buy all these movies and magically everyone that they're just like, oh, it was great, so much fun, yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, you know, when I'm looking at that, I'm like, you know, you've either coincidentally just, you know, are very lucky and blind bought bangers every time, or you're not being honest about the movies you're watching. You know, and I think sometimes there's some of that going on.
I can't argue with that. One thing I will say, though, is I know that a lot of younger people that have gotten into film later than a lot of us did growing up are discovering what is modern cinema. And when you compare a lot of even the schlock from the 70s and 80s, a lot of it is just more entertaining than most of what they're seeing either in theaters, or the more likely situation is what these streamers are spitting out, which is usually very low quality and filmed to look pretty much exactly the same. I swear, I think I've read that Netflix has a requirement for what specific cameras and lenses to use so that they all look exactly like a very similar aesthetic, at least.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Ryan. I think young folks, I mean, there's that intrinsic like sweet spot, right, with some of that schlocky stuff, in that it's unintentionally funny.
Yeah.
Right. So they're doing the MST3K thing during it, you know. And when you're talking about the modern genre stuff, doesn't do that. It's either postmodern and in on the joke and intentionally funny, right? Or it's more like artsy, and it's so slick and produced.
Yep.
That like, if it's bad, it's not like hokey enough to like make fun of it. It's just kind of like this super slick and polished, dull thing. And I do want to say though, again, but I'm an independent filmmaker, you know, so I get it. It's really hard to make movies. And so nothing against the folks making these movies, because it takes a lot to get in the position to make them. But they don't have that kind of, how do I say it? They're not so inane that people can make a good time of it because it's lame. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Like they're just way too polished. They got way too much money behind them. They're way too, like I said, they're way too slick. So that's the genre stuff. Now, there's a lot of good genre stuff being made, but you're not going to have something like, you're just not going to have like something like the 80s or 70s kind of booms. You know what I mean? And you know what? That's fine, because you shouldn't try to go back and replicate that stuff. And we're obviously, Ryan, going to have to get into that discussion, because the nostalgia wanking is like out of control, you know? And again, like, I think that there's a certain burden of responsibility that has to be on the press that covers these things. Right. Like, every time a horror movie is set in the 80s, the press and the critics act like it's a new, fresh thing. Like, how can, like at this point, if something comes out and it's a horror movie set in the 80s, like, you at least have to acknowledge how done to death that is. Like, you can't approach it like, whoa, this is so fresh and it's got such, you know, the 80s style, you know, it's just such a novelty that we're visiting the 80s. You know what I mean? There's nothing novel about going back and doing the 80s at this point, wouldn't you say?
Well, that, and I still argue that probably 85% plus of those movies that are set in the 80s are only doing that so they don't have to write themselves out of cell phones. Because with most of these films, if somebody had a cell phone, the whole movie ends after like 3 minutes. Right.
And you know, that's, you know, it's funny you mentioned that. I am so glad you mentioned that, Ryan, because my mom has this habit, right? My mom is the best, by the way. My mom is the best, one of the best moms ever. But my mom has this habit where when we're watching old movies, and she'll say, well, you know, if they just, you know, had a cell phone, it would be
right.
If they could just get online. And I'm like, Mom, this movie is like set in 1975. You know what I mean? Like this movie doesn't take place in the future.
Right.
Like, maybe if this, you know, detective movie, you know, she made that comment during the French Connection. I was like, Mom, the French Connection isn't a movie trying to front like it's set in 2018. Like, the French Connection is a movie made in the 70s. You know what I mean?
That's perfect.
So anyway, but I'm glad you made that comment though about the cell phones, and I'm also, you know, there's also the trend. Right. So like, I think that I thought Super 8 was probably one of the best in terms of the 80s thing. I watched one of the seasons of Stranger Things, which I thought was really, really good. I don't want anyone to think that I didn't like the subsequent seasons. For me personally, season 1 was all I needed. Like, I had no desire to find out. I was perfectly fine with season 1. That was a good one and done for me. I loved it, and I just didn't want to watch it anymore. Yeah. But I thought they did a wonderful job of capturing what it was like. A movie that didn't was It. I thought, and I think they set It in the 80s just to cash in on Stranger Things. And that story works better within the context of the 50s. I still think It Part 1 set in the 80s was still very good, was still good. But right. I think that it would have been great if it had been set in the 50s, because a lot of it just didn't work being set in the 80s.
That makes sense.
And that's an odd property when you think about it, Ryan, because because It was one of the high points for Stephen King, in the 90s. Like, Stephen King has not been afraid to put his name on some clunker film properties.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, he's and trust me, he is a guy that is, an absolute giant in the industry, a creative giant. He puts over new talent all the time. I love that about him. He loves classic rock. He loves taking his generation to task for tanking the country and tanking the planet. I think he's spot on when it comes to, trends and where the industry is going. I think he's great. All right. But, there's a lot, and I mean a lot of very, very, very questionable film and TV miniseries based on Stephen King work.
Absolutely.
And the original It miniseries was one of those was a big bright spot. That was probably his biggest, definitely. Would you say that next to Tobe Hooper's The Stand, that's like his next best one? I mean
it's up
Tobe
there for
Hooper's
sure.
Salem's Lot.
Right.
I would say It. But what's funny about those movies is that both drop the ball on the second half of the story.
Right.
And the weird part about the modern one dropping the ball on the second half of the story is that one had all the money in the world.
Oh, yeah.
So, the reason that, It Part 2 of the, original miniseries, the reason that it came to such an abrupt conclusion is because they, ran out of money. You know what I mean? They were like, we got no money left. We just got, we got to do what we got to do. You know what I mean?
All the money in the world and all the star power in that new one, too.
Yeah, yeah. And they and they really, look, I thought, and here's what was really missing is that the, some of the best performances by John Ritter, Annette Bening, they just had really good chemistry, the adults in the original It Part 2. And the chemistry was really weird in this new one, in the second part of it. But again, the first part I thought was really solid. And I still get what everybody was going for. And it just kind of goes to show again how difficult making movies is, even when you have all that at your disposal, even when you have those stars that were 100% on board and on the heels of the first part being a mega hit. And of course, one thing I want to say, and, I'm not just saying this because I'm on the podcast with you, but it's guys like you, it's websites and YouTube channels like yours that are, keeping physical media alive, constantly keeping people abreast of what's new, what's being released, what's being reissued, what's special about those reissues, and, the articles and all of that, that you all do to keep it out there. I just want to, give you guys credit, give credit where credit's due, because a lot of the industry, a lot of this boutique, film, Blu-ray, 4K, box sets, that industry, you guys really keep it alive. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, But anyway, what's your next question?
Well, let's take some of that track and go back to Argento with this, because I think most people would agree Argento's name has been on some clunkers, but what most would say is his last masterpiece happens to be my favorite Argento, Why don't you tell us how you feel about Argento's opera?
Well, that movie, again, that was kind of, I saw Suspiria, I saw Demons, which he produced, Lamberto Bava directed. And then I rented, this is when I was in high school. This is in high school now. So, and then I saw Tenebrae, I saw Unsane, which is called Unsane, and then I saw Opera. And then Two Evil Eyes, I saw that one I rented. I'm talking about what I rented at the time. I've since seen all of them at that time. And I think Bird with the Crystal Plumage, because that was in one of the, they had that one in those old school, like big plastic VHS cases.
Right.
That one. And so I actually saw Opera. Terror at the Opera, it was called at the time. But I saw that the same weekend that I watched Antonioni's The Passenger.
Wow. That's a big weekend.
The Passenger is top 50 of all time for me. That's an amazing movie. But what's interesting is that I saw Terror at the Opera afterwards, and I was like, you know what? I was like, Christina Marcellik should have been in Passenger. I was like, she would have been awesome in that movie.
Yeah.
You know, and but anyway, so I thought that movie, I thought Opera was awesome. I thought that was actually, I didn't think it was as good as Suspiria, but I thought it was like the second best one of his that I saw. You know,
nice.
And around this time, I saw The Church as well, even though that was by Michelle Soavi.
Yep.
And I also had. So here's the thing about Argento in those movies. So back then, have you heard of Video Search of Miami and Midnight Video?
I think I have, actually.
So back then, and you know, you've heard of the Psychotronic Film Guide and all that in those magazines. Yeah. So, but like, you would have to go to Barnes and Noble and Borders bookstore and stuff and find these like, you know, borderline one step away from DIY, like cult in like Euro film guides, right?
Right.
And Midnight Video was one of these. I mean, I don't know how the guy got away with it, but you could purchase this little catalog, and that was really DIY at Barnes and Noble and Borders. And all it was all these movies, and they were like not available for commercial, like they weren't available commercially in the US.
Right.
But they were like, you know, director's cuts of this, European cuts of this, like struck from the 35 millimeter. You know what I mean? Like it was bootleg stuff. And that's how you had to get a lot of these movies then.
Yeah.
You know, like especially, you know, the Jess Franco and the Joe D'Amato, and there was a lot of Asian stuff. But they had all these different cuts of stuff like Martin by, you know, George Romero, know, and Another Color of Vanilla, that other obscure Romero flick. But anyway, I ordered the director's cut of Profundo Rosso, Deep Red, from Midnight Video.
Beautiful.
My mom gave me her credit card to like use. And it was like $35, Ryan.
And that wasn't $35 then. That was expensive compared to $35 now.
Yeah, that was a lot of money back then. It's a lot of money now. It's a really lot of money now. It'll always be a lot of money, but especially when you're young. So it shows up, and it was like the quality was like standard play quality.
Right.
And it had the time code running at the bottom. And I remember it being funny because the write-up, and looking back on it, I'm sure all the people that ordered from this guy like knew the kind of quality they were going to get, but for them it was worth it. You know what I mean? Like for them it was worth it.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, I remember like telling the guy, or like I was like, has time code running at the bottom and blah, 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 blah. And like he refunded the money and was like, I'm never doing business with you again.
Oh, geez.
So I returned it though. I returned it. But he sent a note back saying, don't do business with us again. You know what I mean?
Man. The bootleg world was wild then.
And, so anyway, so I had seen that. And then, so Terror at the Opera was just so great. And it had that, I love the existential ending, and I don't want to get into the movie itself too much because we're talking about physical media. So in regard to opera, I later got the Anchor Bay DVD that had the movie on one disc and the soundtrack on another. I had that package that everybody cherishes because up until this new Severin release that's coming out, that was, the only way you could get that, know. But when I was in film school, like I was, because internet was finally a thing, and there were like Dario Argento websites and stuff, and I did a huge presentation of Dario Argento. I mean, he's one of my main guys. Okay, I just want to get that out of the way. So like,
nice.
So like Fellini, Peckinpah, Argento, George Miller, and like Robert Altman are probably my like main, my like personal faves.
That's a hell of a list.
The guys that like really get me going, because like, I mean, you got to realize, man, again, kind of like the like Thing and some of those other movies I mentioned playing every week on commercial television. You could not escape the Mad Max movies.
Right.
Like if you wanted to, Mad Max, The Road Warrior were on every week. And because it was more kid friendly, Thunderdome was on extra screenings. A lot of people don't understand because there's, Furiosa came out.
Right.
A lot of people don't understand that the Mad Max movie that has the most pop culture imprint and one of the biggest pop culture imprints of any movie is Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, even though it's the weakest one.
Oh, yeah.
Very few movies in history are as referenced in so many different ways and influence so many different things like Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome.
I still hope that Furiosa coming out has inspired so many people to come back and watch all of them from the beginning. And we've got recent releases of all of them too. So they're out there and available. And if you've never seen all of them, man, that's a journey to go on. Yeah.
I mean, Road Warrior is top 50 of all time for me. You know what I mean? Easily. But anyway, so going back to Argento. So by the time that I got that set though, all right, things were starting to, my interest and appreciation of Dario Argento was starting to get dinged, in a little bit. You mentioned he hasn't made a good movie in a long time, so we're just going to go ahead and talk about that now because it's around the same time that I got that opera set.
Right?
Is that some of these movies, man? Like I remember when I watched The Card Player, that was pretty much it for me. Like when they were doing that scene where they're playing the computer game on their laptops while on the train tracks. I mean, that's for me as a film viewer, as a film lover, and watching one of the work from my heroes. Like I was visibly like depressed. Like I was like, I can't with this.
It's understandable.
And that for me, like really, like that was kind of the end of me following his work closely, because I'm not I don't care what it is. I don't care, I'm a huge Bob Dylan fan. I'm a huge Bruce Springsteen fan. I'm
Right.
I'm a huge fan of all these filmmakers like I just mentioned. But you know what? I'm not an uncritical, unquestioning loyalist.
Right.
Like if they're doing stuff that I don't like, or if they're doing shoddy stuff and they do shoddy stuff consecutively for a long time, like I eventually just kind of back away.
Right.
And films like it started pretty much like I had Trauma on video, and Trauma was kind of the beginning of the end.
Was that Trauma's the one right after Opera, right? 80, 89? Something
He
like
did
that?
Two Evil Eyes.
Oh, well, yes.
He did Two Evil Eyes, and he like saved face with that because everybody agreed that like his segment was really creative and really good, and it actually is really good.
Right.
But we were at an era where all those kind of like heavy hitters in the horror scene were like really starting to falter.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Because you needed the postmodern humor to save it. Because they were taking themselves too seriously and they were making too many bad movies, and too many bad movies were also starting to flood the like video on demand market. I mean the straight to video market. You remember that?
Oh, of course,
So
yeah.
that did a lot of damage to the genre, to the reputation of the genre. But a lot of those big heavy hitters like Carpenter, Tobe Hooper, Stephen King, during that time they were really struggling. So, once you got into, so he did Two Evil Eyes, then he did Trauma, and I owned those on video. Like by that point, I had a pretty big video collection going. You know what I mean? And, but that was, once you got into, Phantom of the Opera, and you got into the Stendhal Syndrome, which was released by Troma.
Yeah.
It just started to. It was kind of like being a Bob Dylan fan in the 90s. And
yeah, the 90s were rough for a lot of people.
And when you were before Dylan's huge renaissance, and I was telling some students of mine this last year, I was like, there was a period of time where like people would look at you weird if you said you were a Bob Dylan fan. Because he had just run his reputation into the ground so bad in the 80s, in the early 90s, that his renaissance, his late period renaissance, his history making late period renaissance. A lot of people, that's been going on for so long now that people don't remember that he had that huge, really fallow period, right?
Yeah.
But that's what kind of started happening with Dario Argento, right? There was this kind of like period there where people were rediscovering his work, right? So our generation was really big on kind of rediscovering Peckinpah, Leone, and Argento, right? And like John Woo, like our generation kind of really, brought those guys up.
Absolutely.
And the generation after us brought like Tarkovsky and a lot of that stuff to the table. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you also have to keep in mind that every generation wants to discover their own guys, right? Their own, men or women of the arts, right? Whether it's music or cinema, what have you, So like, you got to look at the context, Ryan. It's because I'm getting fired up now. You can't stop me. So you got to look at the context. So like when all of us were like coming up, we were just rediscovering and bringing George Romero into the spotlight and giving him the shine, Argento into the spotlight and giving him the shine, Carpenter, we were getting, Cronenberg, Leone, Once Upon a Time in America, that's what our generation of movie lovers were kind of, in Peckinpah, we were bringing those guys up,
Right.
And reevaluating some of their movies, as being legit classics, and then bringing up movies like George Romero's Martin and Tenebrae and Terror at the Opera and just Argento period, Suspiria. That a lot of people didn't know about that movie at all. You know what I mean? And then Sam Peckinpah, like Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia and Cross of Iron. But like we didn't like we saw like a Lucio Fulci and those other guys like Umberto Lenzi and stuff. Like we saw those guys as just cheap copycats, to be honest.
Well, and speaking of, before you say the next sentence, as we're recording this, happy birthday to Lucio Fulci.
Right. And Lucio Fulci is one of those. I just want to say this. I'm a personal fan, big fan of Don't Torture a Duckling. I think that's a far smarter movie than people give it credit for. It's a very prescient film about small town tribalism and fear of the other and things like that. That's a very good movie. And look, anybody that consistently makes movies, finds a way to consistently make movies, power to them. Okay.
Exactly.
So the guy definitely was doing something right. But our generation, of of cinemaniacs that were bringing those guys up, like we didn't give those guys a lot of credit. It was the generations like afterwards, right? Because it was people got tired of hearing about how great Dario Argento and John Carpenter was, so they started, digging deep into Fulci and Umberto Lenzi and things like that. Right. And to be honest, I used to have the tin box set with the postcards of The Beyond.
Nice,
you know what I mean?
Nice.
And I just want to say this to anybody listening. To this day, the audio commentary by the lead actor and actress for The Beyond is the best audio commentary that I've ever heard. It's so much fun. They have so much fun with it.
Very nice.
So, but like those Lucio Fulci, and for me, I don't see him as the visionary that a lot of other people do. Like for example, again, context is everything. Me and my friends watched, we discovered Dawn of the Dead when, during a sleepover in middle school, and we were like, oh my gosh, like this is just like amazing, this epic friggin' film. A couple weeks later we watched Zombie and we were just like, oh, this is kind of a knockoff of that. It has some cool like gore stuff, but it's not as good. You know what I mean? So like, and like, I still see it as kind of that way. Obviously there's a lot of people that really love that film because it gets a 6-disc box set that comes out every 8 months. But, that was kind of how that happened. And like Umberto Lenzi is now like this big guy,
He's huge, working on a couple of his releases right now, actually.
Right. And Umberto Lenzi is somebody that became, more reevaluated. And for me personally, when I watched those, like I watched Bird with the Crystal Plumage for the first time, and I watched a lot of Giallo movies. And I watch a lot of cinemaniacs on social media talk about these movies. And I watched Bird with the Crystal Plumage for the first time last year, the Arrow Blue, which they did a wonderful job on. And I watched that and I was like, I don't see how you can even compare any of those other movies to this movie.
Right.
Like every component of this movie is clearly superior to all those knockoffs that I keep seeing them, in feeds being like, I think this one's better than Bird with the Crystal Plumage. And, and I'm like, I kind of think they're just being catty because, I just watched it and I'm like, they don't. Like, this is clearly a a masterwork of this form.
Did you, for Argento, did you go back and watch Dark Glasses now that that's come out?
Okay, I have not seen Dark Glasses. I watched the movie that had all the lawsuits going on with Adrian Brody. Giallo.
Yeah.
I watched that movie that made those headlines here. I saw. You want to know a funny story about Dario Argento? Actually, is that, and this is kind of a low point in his legacy, and I felt bad for this. Like when he was shopping around Dracula to get finishing funds, his company accidentally had the full version of the movie without the fully rendered effects on YouTube public, and they didn't even know.
Yikes.
And I came across that. I forget if I came across it or somebody sent it to me, but it was like a sales production company version.
Oh, that's rough.
Of the movie. Yeah. And I was like, yikes. I mean, not only are the quality of the films this way, but this is just kind of really sloppy, professionalism. You know what I mean? And
it will change people's perception of the film. No matter if they had retooled some things and made it a competent film, it wouldn't have mattered. Public discourse would have tanked it already.
Right. And then you're into, and look, I understand there's a lot of fans. Right? I understand there's a lot of fans out there, and look, those that are completists, right, and need appreciate a 3-disc version of the Stendhal syndrome, or one of the ones that have you seen? Oh my gosh, have you seen the wax mask?
Oh, that's another one Severin put out. I did I believe right when they released it. I think that was my first time.
That is, I actually got that one I rented that one from Netflix years back. But that is one of those, it's like a Demons or The Church. It's a movie he produced, and it's for his effects guy. It's his effects guy's directorial debut.
Yeah, Sergio Civiletti.
Yeah, that's a wild movie as a one-time watch.
Well, that and Fulci and Argento helped write that one, I believe.
Yeah, that's a wild movie. I'm not going to give spoilers, but that's a wild movie. And going back to Severin for a second there. You know how I had mentioned that I had but I had bought a bunch of videos from those stores that were going out of business when I went to film school. So yeah, like you said, I got them super cheap, right? It was $1 a piece. No. I think it was 5 for $10. So $2 a piece, and, I'm getting I'm scouring for the cheap thrills, the horror stuff, so we can hang out in my dorm room and we can do shots and drink and have fun with these movies, And but there were some winners in there. A lot of them, I'll be honest, I didn't think were worth $2. Like they say, one man's trash is another man's treasure. Between Vinegar Syndrome and Severin, I see some of those films, in these remastered super duper collector's editions for $35 to $50. Hey, power to them. But some of the winners from that group, I'm not going to name those titles, but some of the winners, some of the ones that were really fun from those batches of movies that I bought was, Burial Ground, which was awesome. And Severin has a great version of that. Cocaine Wars was another fun one.
It's a big one.
Dr. Butcher, MD was a fun one, and Death Warmed Up, and one of the coolest things, growing up, my generation grew up with, Cinemax After Dark. And Laura Gemser was like the first Cinemax After Dark star that almost all of us were exposed to.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So a lot of us, grew up seeing those Black Emanuelle movies, So, and Severin has that huge Black Emanuelle box set available. Laura Gemser is absolutely amazing. So, I just want to put a big spotlight on Severin, not just that they're, releasing my movie Simple Like Silver, they're releasing Opera, but, they've got some other, great discs that I've been lucky to get a hold of. I would definitely throw in there, Out of the Blue was a big film that I discovered in film school. They have a great version of that. Man, I grew up a huge Pink Floyd fan, and before When the Wind Blows was only something you read about in Pink Floyd biographies, and they've got that movie. They got Threads, right? So they got some really cool stuff, and they have my third favorite Jaws movie, the unofficial Jaws 5, Cruel Jaws.
Yes, they do. All this love for Severin, this is the perfect time to transition to Simple Like Silver and Opera together, because these are now, at least for me, going to be intrinsically linked, because you pulled off the impossible in multiple ways. Let's first of all talk about Simple Like Silver. How did this movie come about for you?
Well, here's what happened, Ryan, is that when I was in film school, and I mentioned how the internet was just kind of starting, and Dario Argento sites and things like that, and I was a big fan, and I would look up. This was before I got kind of burnt out on them.
Right.
But I would look up, the actresses and the people involved. And, Christina Marcelek was like impossible to, find anything out about, right? Like you couldn't find anything out about her.
Right.
And outside of her having this like a studio in Madrid, there was nothing you could find about Christina Marcelek. Now, over time, occasionally, because I was, I'm a huge movie geek. I'm still plugged into that cult horror stuff. I would do searches or kind of poke around, and it just became this thing that she was like the holy grail of cult actresses that like no one could get a hold of. Okay.
Oh yeah.
And I think you remember me mentioning that Opera two disc that I got.
Absolutely.
That was probably when those kind of like extra DVDs of the cult and horror stuff was coming out, and like everybody under the sun was participating, in these things. When they were having like the costume designer and stuff, and like the property master and the key grip, and when that set came out, I was like, it's really weird that Christina Marcelek isn't involved in this.
Yeah, when she is Opera, basically.
Yeah, but by that time, though, there were lists online of like, top 10 director actress feuds of all time. And like, she was on there with Argento on like multiple lists. And, so I was like, okay, I can put the pieces of the puzzle together there. Right, dude?
Right.
So I was, I was meanwhile doing I was working as a screenwriter. I was making independent films, you know what I mean? And I had just got done doing some short films, and I had some spec scripts that were ping-ponging around in Hollywood. And I had gotten hired to write a script I had gotten hired to rewrite a script by Lucas Foster. Lucas Foster is a producer who he produced Morbius. He produced Mr. and Mrs. Smith with Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie.
Yep.
And he had also produced Man on Fire by Tony Scott. I think he did another couple of Tony Scott movies too. But I was hired to rewrite this movie for him. And actually, I was originally hired based on another spec script I had written. I was hired to rewrite a character so they could get Mel Gibson to be in this thing.
Interesting.
And what I did, though, was I got the script, and the script was like, you know, to steal a line from a Peckinpah film, was like a crazy woman's quilt. And I was like, you know, getting Mel Gibson isn't going to solve this project's problems. I was like, you know, this script has some serious issues. And I broke it down, and they were like impressed. So they hired me to do a full rewrite of it. The reason I'm telling this story is because I used the money that I got for that to make Simple Like Silver.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And actually the project, I can't really get into. The director that I was working for is a little bit of he's kind of a name.
Right.
But he had his only other movie was one of the most notorious 90s box office flops of all time. And I can say from working with the guy that there's a reason that movie was a flop. And there's also a very good reasons why he hadn't made a movie since then. You feel me?
Oh, yeah.
But Lucas Foster, while we were working on this, he was developing the Morbius movie for like Marvel Sony.
Right.
Okay. So like things had were definitely getting code red with the director, but I wanted to look good for Lucas Foster so he could bring me on board the Marvel train. You know what I mean? I wanted to be on, you know, in one of those writing groups. Like I didn't even want a credit. I just wanted to be in one of those writing groups so I could get some of that Marvel money, right?
Yep.
And so I was like trying to be a good citizen and like, impress him with how much, you know, patience I had dealing with this whack job. But then Lucas Foster wound up getting tired of the guy and just like left the project. Like after paying me, he had like a falling out with the director, right? And then the director though wanted like me and him to like forge ahead like on our own. And I was like, I think I've had enough. You know what I mean?
Right.
I was like, I was like, now that Lucas Foster and, you know, the Marvel train just left the like station, and you know, I don't think I'm putting up with you any further. So anyway, I had just done a short film in Los Angeles with some people that I had been working with, and I had kind of given some second chances to some folks that I shouldn't have, and that's on me. And at the same time, the 30th anniversary of opera was happening, right? And I said, man, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to track down Christina Marcellik, you know, because I saw it was Scorpion. Scorpion announced this set for opera, and I was like, all right. I was like, this is absurd. I was like, you either get Christina or you don't. Period. Like that's the juice. That's what's missing. That's what's missing. You got the publicist on here. Like nobody. You don't get the publicist to do an interview if you've got Christina Marcellik.
Right.
Right. So I was like, all right. So I'm gonna find her. I'm gonna make this my thing. So I went ahead and I actually did contact Scorpion to see if they had reached out to her, and they had. They just assumed that she didn't care. And what their thing was, and what their whole point was that if Anchor Bay couldn't get her to do it, then there was no reason to make the effort.
I hate that attitude.
Because Anchor Bay their whole point was Anchor Bay has millions, and if those millions didn't get her to do it, then it just, you know what I mean? Like, it was just best to like leave it alone.
Right.
And my whole thing was, well, you know, I was smart enough to know that if I did manage to track down Christina, I definitely wasn't going to be approaching her with a horror project.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, that wasn't going to fly. Because one of the reasons a lot of these actresses that are affiliated with these horror films stay out of the limelight is because they get tracked down by crazy psycho horror movie fans. That is a fact. That is a fact. They attract stalkers, right? Famous example being an Adrienne King from Friday the 13th.
Yep.
Right? She went into hiding for how many years? Like a decade?
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, anyway, I started poking around, and I found some, you know, some students that had attended her acting studio, and I started to kind of, you know, piece the story together a little bit. And but luckily, I'm going to cut to the chase. Luckily, after I was, you know, doing a bunch of fruitless searching, Jane Spencer, who is a independent filmmaker, activist, very good friend of mine. She did. She directed Little Noises and a very cool indie called The Ninth Cloud. If anybody can track it down on streaming, The Ninth Cloud's a very cool movie. But she was Facebook friends with Blanca.
Oh, wow.
Christina's sister. And I was like, you know, that can either mean something or it cannot mean something, right? Like, right. I'm Facebook friends with some people I know wouldn't give me the time of day if I message them. You know what I mean? But Jane had actually auditioned Blanca for like a role for one of her films, for a film she had made. So they had a relationship.
Nice.
So I sent Blanca a message to give to Christina. And that was that. Life went on. And then 6 months later, at like 4:00 in the morning, I got a message from Blanca saying, Christina wants to talk to you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just from happened. One message. That's impressive.
Yeah, because I sent, you know, a pitch and stuff like that. I really wanted to make it clear it wasn't going to be I made it clear it wasn't going to be about opera and it wasn't going to be a horror film.
Right.
You know, because at that time, Christina wasn't, you know, going there. Right? That just wasn't something that she talked about. So anyway, so not only did I track down Christina, you know, when I talked to her on the phone, she was very funny. She was very polite. She's very professional, right? I just want to say this to anybody listening, is that I have seen more people throw away their careers in this business because they can't maintain prompt professional correspondence.
Oh my gosh, yes. That is such an obvious thing to people like us, but man, just the way that some of these people speak, it's crazy.
Absolutely. And and Christina Marcellik, even if she's not in the best of moods, she will message me back within 48 hours. All right? So she gets the work, right? She gets priority.
Yeah.
And she gets the respect because she's able to communicate and stay in touch as a professional, right? And that is like, she is a 60-year-old woman. And I am surrounded by, you know, actors and actresses half her age that can't be friggin' bothered to respond to simple communication through email in a timely manner.
So
you know what
true.
I mean?
Oh yeah.
So guess what? She'll get the opportunities. Now that's not to say there's not flare-ups from time to time or bumps in the road.
Of course.
This is a stressful business. You know what I mean? This is a stressful business. But what's great is that Christina is very mischievous and had a very self-deprecating sense of humor. And she had a friend, Carmen, that also that she wanted to work with her, that came on board as a co-producer of the film. Carmen also is just very funny. Very funny. So you had the right personalities for this project, because I not only got Christina hadn't acted in like 25 years. Okay.
Yeah.
So not only did I convince her to do the project, but I convinced her, that to come over to the United States and do the film incognito, wandering around St. Augustine pretending we were tourists. And she was down with that. Right? And
on that note, I really want to say, before you continue with that I was completely taken by your photography of St. Augustine. There is something about this. I mean, not to just heap praises on everything that I could say about you right now, but every single shot was breathtaking and felt like a completely different world. And some of that is, the stark black and white photography, but a lot of it is just the shot choice was immaculate in this film.
Ryan, thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate it. One of the main goals of the film was for the film to be almost entirely comprised of money shots, of bangers.
Well done.
Thank you. And we shot a lot of footage. We shot a documentary amount of footage. And I gave, the editing and the cinematography, I actually gave those credits. But even though I did both, I gave the credits to two friends of mine from high school that I used to talk their ears off about Dario and Argento films, but they both passed away when they both passed away when they were young. So I kind of did that to give them a nod, and also because I don't think it's cool to have your name 1,000 times in the credits.
Right.
But so I really appreciate I really appreciate you saying that, and because that was definitely an intention. And this project had it all in regard to the experience. We had so much fun. Christina, Carmen, and myself had so much fun going out there in St. Augustine and having, each day we ate at a new place. That was great. Just wandering around and doing all of this. You are not going to find a lot of people that are going to be willing to do that.
Right.
You know what I mean? You are not going to find a lot of people willing to do that. And every day, that was one of those experiences that every day going out there, I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this.
Well, and every layer of this story makes it a little more unbelievable. So for those that haven't seen it yet, it's not just this, amazing story that Christina comes out of retirement to do this. It's that it's a unique film, that there's not normal dialogue, and it's not from a filmmaker that's established, that has, pages and pages of IMDb credits that everybody knows that they're coming out just for this opportunity to work with. It's clearly that she believed in this project. And when you look at the story itself, especially that first act with the way that she speaks, there's so much just genuine emotion and empathy in the message that she's giving in that part. I'm so glad that you were able to get her for this.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ryan, for saying that too, because, you want to look, but Christina wanted to look good, right? And she also, though, didn't want the responsibility of like having to, carry an entire film. You know what I mean? And that's why it really, worked, because for those that haven't seen it, it's like a triptych. So it's like 3 interweaving little, stories. And we also wanted to do something that was playful, that was kind of winking at the audience a bit in regards to, art house cinema. I had, because we didn't want a laborious kind of thing. And we had, and I want to give props to, while I'm on here, Christina and Carmen were absolutely fantastic, but Susanna Nelson, who played the girl, was so much fun too. And so was the boy. Everybody involved in that was great. Especially because, once you're shooting in the summer and you're in Florida, you've got so many hours of daytime.
Right.
So like you can go out early, you can shoot for 4 hours, you can have a great lunch somewhere and then shoot for a couple more hours and then go home. That was a near, in terms of, look, man, I've produced some movies where it's been tough going.
Right.
You know what I mean? And this was one of them where, look, there was a lot that could have gone wrong. You know what I mean? Like there was a lot that could have gone wrong, and everything went right. And I always tell people to a certain degree about filmmaking is that, like anything, it's a numbers game. Like you have to look at you have to look at the best in this business, right? So look at the best in this business, Ryan. Look how many of them have many bad films.
Oh, yeah.
And that's when they have every resource at their disposal. But you got to crunch it down. So if you're doing things on a small level, like I am, right? And you have to, and you keep doing things, and every time you do something, you're doing something different, right? The numbers are going to catch up with you. Like you're just not going to smash it every time.
Of course not.
So having an experience like that, and especially and Christina taking that chance on me was absolutely life-changing. But here's what segues into the opera thing. So Christina wasn't talking about opera at all.
Right.
Like during the shoot. Like I kind of mentioned it at one point, and she like gave me a look and kind of a short answer. And I mean, when Christina doesn't want to do something, I mean, you're gonna know. And I want to say this though about this one shot we did, is that we were doing a lot of like Steadicam stuff, right? And I referenced Jack Nicholson from The Shining, and she goes, "Oh," and there's a scene where Jack Nicholson's walking down the hall in The Shining and he's talking to people.
Right.
And she did his entire choreography from that. like mimicked it. And I was like, wow, that's wild. And so that's just an example. I mean, she was just a great collaborator. She was just a really good collaborator. I couldn't have asked for anyone better for that. And now, but like I said, we didn't talk about opera at all. But on the last day, when she was about to leave, we had such a great experience. I was like, all right, I'm going to test the waters.
Yeah.
And I brought a couple of Scorpion opera blues for her to autograph. I brought 3. One for a buddy of mine who had done some work on the film. And then for, two friends that I knew that are big Argento fans. Like, they would love that because she's never autographed.
Right.
Never autographed anything. And she went ahead and did it.
Wow.
So anyway, the pandemic hits. I'm not going to get into all that. Pandemic hits. I cut the film. We decided it's best to release it, to press and stuff during the pandemic, which turned out to be a great strategy for it. We had some feelers from some festivals that I have connections with from prior projects. But look, the film turned out better than we had hoped and was opening all the doors for me that it needed to. And I'm at an age, Ryan, where, look, man, like if I don't need the festival slot, like, I'm gonna let somebody else have it. Like, yeah. I've been ping ponging around the festival circuit long enough, and I'm at an age too where I'm not comfortable taking away slots from younger talent.
Of course.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm not big time or anything, but I'm like, doing rewrite work for Lucas Foster to finance like little independent films. Like, I don't need to also be like taking away film festival slots from struggling independent filmmakers.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'm just not. So I went ahead and, told those festivals, I was like, we're fine. Like, we're in good shape with this, and then, but around this time, I was still speaking we actually went to Spain. So I went to Spain and prepped another project with Christina during the pandemic. Yeah, with Sean Harwell, who's a buddy of mine who wrote Eastbound and Down, that HBO show.
Nice.
And Red Oaks and the Campaign with Will Ferrell.
Yeah, yeah.
He would. Yeah, we wrote this like surreal, like post-apocalyptic kind of thing. And Jane Spencer, who I mentioned, she was going to be working on it too. And I went to Spain, to Madrid, and for like no money. It was towards the tail end of the pandemic when I went, but I bought the tickets months before. So it was like nothing. So I had this glorious hotel in downtown Madrid and the flight. And it was like and I was there for like 12 days. I mean, it was so cheap. It's like, it was ridiculous. So I went there and we did costume, hair tests, rehearsals, location scouting, and all of that in Madrid. And then that project wound up, I'm not going to get into detail, but basically Omicron and the stock market rout of that year like scared away the small money.
Right.
But the full Rue Morgue is actually, I wrote a full breakdown of developing that project, including the last version of the script Sean and I worked on, and that's going to be, if it isn't by the time this is published, like that's going to be in Rue Morgue.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah. So that's a big blow by blow on that. But anyway, after that, Christina reached out to me. Like, I was talking to Christina about something else. And she had mentioned participating in this Dario Argento doc, and she had been asked. And I was kind of telling her that, like, she should do that. You know what I mean? That it's time to, enough time has passed, and I didn't get into it with her really. But she went ahead and participated in the Argento doc. Which, what's funny is that I've been in contact with the filmmakers of that documentary about something else that I can't get into right now. But I still haven't actually seen it. And I guess the reason why I haven't seen it is because how can it not be a fucking series?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, with everything that's been his life, that's a lot to go into.
I mean, the Dario Argento has revolutionized the business, has revolutionized the horror genre on 3 separate occasions.
Oh, yeah.
with Bird with the Crystal Plumage, with Profundo Rosso, and then Suspiria. Like, bam, bam, bam. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he has multiple. I mean, there's you could do an episode on each movie.
Easily.
And you want to know something? You could do an episode on each of the turkeys too, and it would still be fascinating.
True.
Because there's a lot to learn from when things go wrong. Like, and trust me, I've done projects where things have gone really, really wrong. You know what I mean? And you know, so that was kind of. So when that documentary came out, and it was like, it's like an hour and 50 minutes or an hour and 45 minutes.
Right.
I was like, how is this? Like, the documentaries that I was watching on Dario Argento, right? The ones on video that came out all those years ago were like 90 minutes. This is 20 minutes longer and covers 3 more decades. Like, how
it's shorter?
You know what I mean?
It's shorter than mine and your conversation already.
Right. I mean, but I already checked the length, Ryan, for how long your podcasts go. So I'm going to be going for a little bit here. So you've got some long running times on your podcast. So I'm taking advantage of all of it, Ryan. I've got you hostage. So she went ahead and did that, and then once she did that, I was like, okay. I was like, all right, you know, so she's open to that. And then around the same time, I was, you know, started speaking to Severin about releasing Simple Like Silver. And, you know, David Gregory, who runs Severin, you know, he liked the film a lot. And he was also mentioned that they were this is like 2 years ago. Like, this has been a long time. And that there was going to be an opera 4K coming out. And I said, you know, well, why don't I see if I can get Christina to do an audio commentary and then do on-camera interviews? Because that's what a future set of opera has to have. Like, it has to have that. You know, for it to break away from the pack, even if it is a great 4K transfer. You know what I mean? That's just like it's just missing. You got to have that. And I want to take a moment here and give a shout out to Alicia Lopez, who is somebody that is a friend, is been an assistant and a translator who's been working with Christina and myself for the last few years on these projects. I mean, she's done translation of the Simple Like Silver script for Christina. She translated the Night Owl Only Blinks Twice script for Christina, the one that we shot in Madrid. So I got to give her a big shout out for helping coordinate all this. Okay. And, you know, it was one of those things where, you know, we needed Christina, you know, and Christina was down to do it, you know what I mean? And she had a wonderful time. She did audio commentary. She did the on-camera minute interviews. I want to give a shout out to Alberto as well, who is Severin's liaison in Madrid. And then Angel, who is the program director of Sigis, did the audio commentary with Christina. You know, and she... you know, it was just very important to all of us that it be, and you know, there was some obviously some back and forth, and a couple logistical things needed to be ironed out, a couple of hiccups, but you know, when you're working, here's the thing: when you pad your time, you can iron out all that stuff and deal with it as it happens a lot better. Right. And we had been chiseling away at this for like a while, so that when things came up, we could address them. You know what I mean? And anyway, it went ahead and got done. And Christina had a wonderful time with Angel, the program director of Sigis. So they are So when they went ahead and released the details of this set, I had no idea that it was going to be that expansive. Okay. Now, as somebody who's just from the outside looking in, Ryan, like, I have not watched opera in years. Despite all of this, working with Christina for years on multiple projects and organizing some of this stuff, like, I myself haven't watched opera in forever. When I had her autograph some like Scorpion blues, like, I didn't have one for myself. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
So I haven't seen opera in forever. But so outside looking in, when I look at that set, you know, Christina Marcellik, you know, both audio commentary and on camera and interviews, and the standalone disc of the soundtrack, just like that Anchor Bay release we discussed earlier. So the Dario Argento materials, the Christina Marcellik materials, and the disc. Those are like, as somebody just from the outside looking in, right? So now, as far as the definitive version of the film and just making sure that you have everything that's ever been and can be in a set like that, it definitely has all of that in it. You know what I mean? So it doesn't, you know, when I was talking to David Gregory, I said, hey man, we were on a Zoom call, and I said, hey man, you know, I've been seeing a lot of people posting these like these best of the year, you know, Blu-ray box sets and top 10 list Blu-ray discs. And I was like, I want this to be one of those. I want this to be a contender.
Absolutely.
And man, this 5-disc set that he put together, and you know, all the people that worked on it, like all I did was assist and arrange for Christina to be involved, and I kind of mapped out how to go about that, you know, with the audio commentary, on camera and interviews. But I had no involvement in the rest of it. I didn't know exactly what they were doing. So, but it is absolutely epic, and I think it certainly, I don't even have a 4K player, Ryan, and I certainly don't have one in Pakistan. But it's certainly going to be an epic set. And what did you think when you saw those? I mean, it's your favorite Argento film, you said. So what was it? Everything that you were hoping for, or what are your thoughts?
I'm thrilled. This is one that I had been in talks with Severin to potentially work on last year, and the disc just ended up being so overloaded. There was literally no room to add us, so we respectfully bowed out. But it is the type of presentation for somebody's favorite film that makes you go, nothing will ever be able to top this. This literally has everything you could want. It is something that appeals to, you know, the Dario Argento fans. It appeals to the people that are into rare films, because this is not a film like we were talking about earlier. This isn't one that gets a ton of re-releases. This has been sort of difficult to get on HD in a good release. And other than that Scorpion disc, this is going to be what most modern collectors are going to have their eyes on, because it is everything, which is just a gift when you love the film like this.
That's a great way of putting it. That's a great way of putting it, and that's interesting to hear about. You were looking at working on it. I had no idea. So that's definitely a new one for me. I got to be honest. I'll always be transparent about what I don't know. I am not, I don't know 100% how the boutique release business works. Like I do know that the rights come in bundles. So I know that he has like a few of these. Obviously, he got the rights all at once, I assume, for all of these, or is that how that works?
Sometimes it depends on where they're getting them. It could be from a producer or from a studio. And from obviously they've been working on opera for quite some time, and it sometimes it's bundles. There are some boutique labels that will flat out refuse to take bundles, and they'll say, no, we're only coming after the movie we want. We're not going to put out the stuff that you're throwing in.
Well, I know I'm glad you mentioned that, because I know for a fact that Kino definitely doesn't have that deal.
You're right.
I know for a fact that some of these studios, that when Kino Lorber says, hey, we want to do a release of, say, Elmer Gentry, right?
Yeah.
Elmer Gentry with Burt Lancaster. I know for a fact the studio says, if you want that one, you got to take all the Burt Lancaster movies.
These are their 9 films with it.
yeah, because they definitely, because you could tell, like when they there was that one Roger Moore movie that they wanted, that they hyped, yes, and they wound up getting the other 7 Roger Moore movies, and they were literally selling them for like $6 within 2 months.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Crazy stat. I don't know if you read this. Kino Lorber in 2023 released almost 250 releases. Not films, but releases. So many of those were box sets even.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of Kino. I've got a lot of their discs. I know I was, talking a little bit earlier about, kind of the big studio flops with the A-list names. You know what I mean? Right. Some of those I can do without, because but they do a lot of good stuff. Absolutely. Who I really liked a lot, and I have a lot of their releases, is Raro Video.
Raro is great.
I thought Raro were awesome. They got into, I think they're out of business. They got into I know the pandemic really did a number on them, and they were having some issues with getting, discs to people in a timely manner towards the end of that pandemic year. But they were always good to me. I got a lot of great stuff from their sales, like excellent stuff. I got that General, what is it? General Rovero by Rossellini. I got the Fellini, the clown set they did.
Yep.
I got the Long Hair of Death, which is really underrated Gothic Halloween haunter. There's a couple other ones. I don't have them in front of me, but I was a big fan of Raro Video. I was really sad to actually see them go out of business.
Well, they're maybe a bit of a surprise, not out of business. They are not releasing as much in the US, but now they're partnered with Radiance out of the UK as really? Distribution partner. And so they're getting better releases in the UK than they had in the US even. They're getting booklet essays, they're getting new special features, they're getting 4K remasters on some of these films that they've done before, and now they look better than they ever have on home video. And they're not doing a lot, they're not prolific or anything, but they're still putting out a good, we'll say, probably averaging 3 or 4 a year.
Nice. That's good to hear, man. That's good to hear, because I really liked their I think there's an Antonioni film of theirs I picked up. No. I've got their version of The Conformist.
Yep. That's another one amazing. That I think they just redid that too.
I love their version of The Conformist. And I also had Shoot First, Die Later.
That's the big one, yeah.
I bought that just because I want to use that as my as the title of my biography one day.
Yeah, November of 2023, Raro re-released The Conformist through Kino Lorber, actually. And it's got a brand new 4K master, and it's supposed to look great.
So I'm excited to hear that. I still love Raro. I want to give David Gregory again some props, like during the process of me working with him on Simple Like Silver, and also arranging some stuff for opera. I mean, he definitely he hooked me up with some copies. He hooked me up with some blues.
Yeah.
And what's ironic though is that I received all of them like literally like a couple of weeks before I had to move to Pakistan. So I've got everything in storage.
Right.
They're all in storage. So I've got the church set, and I've got Cemetery Man, which I love Cemetery Man. That's
amazing release.
Great horror movies, but I haven't watched it. I've got Santa Sangre he sent me, and Threads, which is a huge blind spot for me. I've never seen Threads.
Oh wow,
huge blind spot for me.
One.
Yeah. He sent me that. Beyond the Darkness, of course. Burial Ground. Kind of those hits for me.
Yeah.
I didn't sting them for a Jaws 5, Cruel Jaws, and I got from Mondo Macabro. There's another from Mondo Macabro. I got another. I got one of the Black Emmanuel films.
Oh, Emmanuel in America.
Yes, I got that from Mondo Macabro, and then I actually, about 2 years before their box set, Severin had Emmanuel and the Lost Cannibals.
Yes,
and I bought that, so I already have those two. So I'm not. I didn't feel like I needed to get the box,
right.
Asking for
the
a
box set is one of the most impressive physical media releases ever. The fact that they were able to just bring those together, it really speaks to how passionate Kayla Janice and David Gregory and Andrew Furtado and all these people are on lost film and rare film, and really preserving literally the love of the cinema behind it. Because these, let's be honest, the Black Emmanuel films are not for everybody, but the fact that we have them all together is astonishing.
I 100% agree with you, and they're kind of a cult.
Absolutely,
a cult label. You know what I mean? So it's appropriate for them. You know what I mean? It would be weird if like Paramount released that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Man.
They're just not. And
I do want to see the cover art they choose to go with some of these Black Emmanuel films, though.
I actually got Mondo Macabro's Symptoms, which is a great looking disc.
Nice. Yeah.
I like that one. I'm not sure if I got anything else from Mondo Macabro besides those two films, though.
They're one of my favorites. Their motto is the wild side of world cinema, and I got to be honest, I feel like I can trust their curation. It seems like everything that they do is just speaking to this random itch that I have in cinema, and Mondo Macabro just happens to scratch it. It's so odd. Every single film has been super enjoyable from them.
I mean, I think they do. I mean, they kind of like fall between the cracks a little bit. Like, I think that
absolutely.
I think it's kind of. I think there's definitely a little bit of a scramble for what isn't being scarfed up by Arrow, Vinegar Syndrome, or Severin.
Right.
Vinegar Syndrome. I've got some titles from Vinegar Syndrome. Vinegar Syndrome, more than the others, primarily has the kind of movies, I've seen most of them, but a lot of Vinegar Syndrome's catalog are the ones that I wouldn't be interested in seeing again.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, they're the ones that I looked at and said that one wasn't worth $2. You know what I mean? When I was like buying them all from that video store. Now, that's not to say I don't have some really good discs from them. I got Sweet Sweetback's Badass Sound from Vinegar Syndrome. I got what was the Patty Hearst by Paul Schrader? Yeah, I got from them. I screwed up and got their. I think did Vinegar Syndrome do that Graduation Day?
They did, yes.
Okay, I got that. And then, but I screwed up and got Dolly Dearest, and I thought it was Dolls. I confused it with Dolls.
Oh, yeah.
Which is an old fave of mine.
Stuart Gordon, gotta love it.
Yeah, and I got Dolly Dearest instead, which wasn't so hot. But I mean, it was still fun, but I made a mistake. That might be one that I give away later.
Dolls is out now from Arrow Video, actually, as part of a new box set they did last year.
Oh,
they did an Empire Pictures box set.
Yeah, so right now I've got a good selection of stuff that I've gotten from Vinegar Syndrome, right? That I've got from Arrow, that I've got from Severin, and that I've got from Kino Lorber, and that I have from Criterion.
Right.
And they're, along with the rest of my movies, okay, they're in storage. But even when I leave here, I am not, until I get through and watch X amount of those, I'm not buying anymore. I got to have an embargo. I've got to watch them. You know what I mean? And
right.
Trust me, I still, check into Vinegar Syndrome's website. Look, they're very passionate. They do great work. It's just, a lot, the titles aren't necessarily wants for me, but hey, I still keep an eye on them. I keep an eye on Mondo Macabro. Keep an eye on all of them. Now, I want to end this discussion by talking about, the future of physical media. Okay.
Yeah, please.
Because I want to get your take on this, because you're more the expert here. And, I'm somebody that, big VHS collector. Then when I started to get really big into DVDs, and I actually, during a time, I went back to Columbia House to stock up my DVD collection.
Amazing.
I went back to that because you could get great stuff. You could get Cries and Whispers. You could get all sorts of cool stuff through Columbia House to a point. But so when I started really doing that, I let a girlfriend of mine and her boyfriend have my old VHS collection.
Oh, wow.
And actually, that girl is Lindsay Sims. She's no longer with the guy, but her son is the kid in Simple Like Silver.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. And so, but here's the deal, is that I gave it to them because they were going to watch all the cool stuff, and then they were going to donate it to a library, which is what I was going to do.
Love that. Yeah.
So then I had the DVDs. Now here's what happened, is that I was building that up, and then between some moves and, roommates and ex-girlfriends, I lost quite a bit of DVDs.
Yeah.
So then, Blu-ray came out, right? And, people felt a certain way about Blu-ray after getting acclimated to DVDs, right?
Of course.
Now, you might remember the fateful Christmas where they just cried, they cried uncle and said, okay, we're going to lower all the Blu-ray players and Blu-rays to the same price as DVDs to get you all to buy them.
Yep.
Okay.
Everything fell to $20. That was amazing.
Yeah. So here's what happened, though, is that, I kind of went through this phase where I was bitter at the DVDs I had lost. So I wasn't buying anymore.
Right.
But then I was look, I'm an active filmmaker. I teach. I mean, this is silly. You know what I mean? So I started buying used DVDs. Okay.
Yeah.
For cheap, because you can buy DVDs for $2 from, bookstores and stuff. And then I started getting into Blu-rays. Now, while I was finally getting into Blu-rays years down the road, a bunch of other people were starting to pay attention to how much was being available on Blu-ray and also started buying Blu-rays, right?
Yeah.
Then the rug got pulled out from under us, and they released 4K.
2016.
And they really went all in on it during the pandemic.
Yes, they did.
Okay, which didn't take off. Blu-rays sold, well, here's the thing. A couple things happened, right? And I want your take on this. A couple things happened. One, I mean, especially with a lot of these kind of movies we've been talking about, the cult and like horror stuff. I mean, you literally just had box sets come out in Christmas for movies. And then it was January and you were announcing a new 4K box set that was going to be out in 3 months. Right? Now that's a little chintzy. Not chintzy, but that's a little, that can be seen as kind of tacky.
Right.
But it's kind of like it took a long time for people to finally come around to Blu-ray. Right. And as soon as that happens, 4K is the thing that you're going to push and try to tell everybody that Blu-rays are like has-been technology and they need to get 4Ks, right?
That's how they're marketing some of it, yeah.
And then at the same time, vinyl has a resurgence to end all resurgences.
This is true.
And at the same exact time that happens, the economy is plunged into a state where people only have one physical media thing they're going to be buying.
Yep.
And 4K isn't it. It's vinyl records. Right? So what do you think about about that trend? I mean, as somebody who's like really like this is your specialty, what do you think about the future of 4K? What do you think about going back to the same group? I mean, how do you see it sustaining itself? That's my question.
There's a lot there. First off, vinyl has fallen off like crazy. These last 6 months have seen a decline for everything. Are you still collecting any music?
I have my list. So like a bunch of people like, with the vinyl thing. Yeah. Here's what's funny is that I actually, true story, this past summer, I got hired by the production coordinator of Merge Records to write a pilot and series Bible about the vinyl resurgence. Wow. That started around 2015. Great. Yeah. That's actually still an active and development. And that was actually one of the most fun screenwriting assignments that I've ever had. But nice. I'm glad you asked me point blank about where I was about buying music. So like a lot of people, and I think I'm going to give you the answer you want to hear. Like a lot of people, I got back into vinyl kind of around the pandemic, right? Right. I kind of wanted to rebuy what I had, when I was in high school, but instead of CD, have it on vinyl, right? Oh yeah. So I had a list. I deviated from the list a couple of times, but I've kind of gone through the list, and now I'm, not really buying them anymore. Just done. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, there's only so much I can, I pretty much I did what everybody did. I replicated what I wanted to replicate. I got some, I got the nostalgia high. I bought some things that I didn't plan on buying, like everybody did as well. You know what I mean? And now it's kind of like, the Blu-rays, right, that I have. Like now is a time where it's like, okay, now I've got to, I'm putting the brakes on buying, and I need to, put the pedal to the metal on appreciating what I bought. Right. So continue.
The last 6 months, the economy has gotten to a point where nothing is sustainable for any of us as consumers. I mean, even when you're doubting groceries, you can't really make vinyl a priority if you're going to live,
right?
I guess. So yeah, vinyl has fallen, and the story behind it that you're talking about is one of the most fascinating things to cover for the last decade or so, because there was almost nothing, and then some bands were doing it to be cool, and it was doing well for them on tour and stuff like that. And then we got to a point where old soundtracks and scores are getting released and selling out on day one, like within hours. And suddenly the entire vinyl industry is in a 13 to 16 month delay for production. And we've not seen things like that happening. And so a lot of people jump in on vinyl. We have lots of these smaller boutique vinyl companies that pop up out of nowhere, and suddenly they're not selling, which is sad, obviously, if you jump into that business and it's not doing well for you. But then if you compare any of that to the Blu-ray side, some things feel the same, but
Blu-ray
some things...
and 4K.
Well, yes, of course. And some things feel very different. Some things feel very the same. Some of the outcries from people definitely feels the same. And I will say one thing that you mentioned of a company putting out a Blu-ray and then a few months later putting out a 4K. There are not very many documented times in history of that happening in a way that feels actually insulting to me, at least. There are some times where I would almost say it was close, but from the fact that I've been able to speak to most of these companies and get insight on what they were doing, most of them are at a position where they were not transitioning to 4K. So when they made that choice, it was not, in a ploy to get people to buy Blu-ray and then buy 4K later. It was not sustainable for them to make the choice to do 4K then. And then things changed. Some prices went down. Some of the market outcries because of studio releases were like, well, these 4Ks look great. I would love to see that from your stuff. And people started demanding it. And now we're at a position where we're seeing that bubble burst a little bit like we did in vinyl. So especially on social media, you'll see a lot of these people say, I'm not buying this release unless it's in 4K, which is one of the most insanely ignorant comments that you can make about these releases, primarily for the reason that these films, to put them out, if you jump from Blu-ray to 4K, for a small boutique company, the prices could jump as much as 3 times just for an upgrade to 4K UHD. And when you're looking at pricing those for consumers, you're looking at maybe a $5 increase from Blu-ray to 4K that you can get away with, even though it costs astronomically more to put them out. And so
here's my question, Ryan, is that, and that's actually, I'm glad you're telling me there about how much they can charge per what goes into it, because that is something that I didn't know prior to this conversation. But what I'm saying is that the people that are not cinephiles, right, like at pretty average people that aren't cinephiles, right? They finally got into Blu-ray, right? Like they were turned off by the original Blu-ray thing right after DVD. It took them years to finally start buying some Blu-rays and get a Blu-ray player. Right. And then all of a sudden you have 4K not long after that. Do you think a lot of those people are like said, are diving into 4K? Or are they just like, I'm just going to, whatever, I can stream. Top Gun Maverick's going to be on TV anyway. I mean, do you see them jumping into 4K?
Here's the thing. I think you mentioned one of the things that's the biggest part of the argument here, and that is the hardware. So most TVs that are for sale now for the average consumer are 4K. When you walk into even like Walmart, every single panel that you see for sale hanging up on the wall is a 4K panel. So most people at this point, if you bought a new TV since 2017-ish, probably, most people were buying 4K TVs since then, if you were upgrading. Now, the hard part is the opposite side. 4K players are not as prolific as they were for Blu-ray, but then on top of that, the Blu-ray players weren't as prolific as they were for DVD, and then on top of that, those weren't as prolific as they were for VHS. So the fact that this funnel keeps getting smaller and smaller, you're making it so people can't dive in. And the only reason that we have as many people in 4K as we do probably is because of the newest generation of video game consoles, the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, that support 4K discs, which I'm going to be honest, and hopefully this isn't a surprise for anybody listening. If you're watching these 4K discs on a game console, those are optimized for a completely different version. You're not even seeing 4K movies at the rate that you would be if you had a proper, like, decent quality 4K player with a well-calibrated TV. Is it better or not? No, it is not better. It is actually sometimes significantly worse. So if you're playing the I didn't know any of this. This is great. I'm glad I saved this question towards the end. Yeah. So if you're just putting your 4K movie into the video game console and you're going to watch it, it doesn't look very good. It doesn't look as good. It doesn't look as good as it could. And so one of the problems here is that somebody that's sitting there at home, and maybe they were still into physical media, they're watching it and they go, well, this isn't that impressive. Why would I go all in on 4K discs? Because when I see these, they're $25 at Walmart and the DVDs are only $11. I remember liking DVDs, and this 4K is kind of underwhelming to me. So if it's less than half the price, why would they go all in? We're not incentivizing them to do that. We're not incentivizing them to be all in on physical media. Now, the only thing that might be doing it nowadays is the economy has gotten so bad that we are seeing the price of streaming explode. We're seeing licensing for titles run out, and suddenly people that are used to streaming can't watch their favorite TV show that they've watched every single night for the last 5 years on Netflix. Now it's not on Netflix, and they have to go pay $11 a month for some other service if they want that as well. Well, let me ask you a question about that. And because that was something that just transpired during these last strikes, right? Yeah. Because a lot of what we're talking about, there's no like black and white reason, for things being what they are. There's a lot of things that contribute to the overall conditions. But you had these strikes happen, right? These writer strikes. Yep. Okay. And then, Netflix and Hulu arbitrarily, with no advertising, as like a new release, put up like sitcoms from the 80s and 90s. Yep. With no advertising. They put up Moonlighting. Yep. That no young person has ever heard of. Not at all. And young people made it a hit just because they made it like the new release. And then what was that show on Netflix that also ran that became like 20 times as big a hit as it ever was on TV? Oh, like Suits? Yes. Suits was all of a sudden like the hottest thing. So after they did that, right? And I mean, after they did that, I mean, it's kind of like makes the strike look weird. Yeah. Because then they're doing the math. And then they're also realizing that there's more content, right? Like we've been talking about niche kind of things, right? Right. And, but there's more content available of all different shapes and sizes and quality and genre.
nobody could ever watch it in a lifetime.
Of course.
So them generating new content, right, is not only just like, is pretty much only for the new niche.
Right.
And literally just creating a jobs program. Because now they've realized that technically they don't have to generate new content.
Right.
Like, they're generating new content because they want to, as opposed to needing to. They've probably realized that they could take some movies on Netflix and Amazon that just washed up there, that have like A-list stars that like no one watched. They could go ahead and put together a trailer and release it in theater and make it, put it in theaters and make some money.
Make it look like the greatest thing ever. And now Netflix owns a theater in LA somewhere.
Right. And so all of these things play into each other. Right.
Exactly.
And I think that you have a market, and you have a market, right? Like a niche market with this cult and horror stuff. Right. And so what you have to look at there is like, with the economy being the way that it is, right? With a competing product, which vinyl was, let's be honest, vinyl took a chunk out of DVD and Blu-ray and 4K sales and toy sales, right? So you have to look at, like, is this customer, like, there's always going to be the uber fans of any kind of niche cult thing,
right,
that have money, right? Like there's the lawyers and doctors that are big nerds in their spare time, right? Yeah, they're going to go ahead and buy the new thing whenever it
literally
comes out,
all of
right?
it, yeah.
Yeah. They're going to buy all of it. You know what I mean? But this is, a lot of the people that find a comfort in that genre, find comfort in meeting their heroes and conventions and all of these things. I mean, a lot of these people are not upper class.
Right.
So do you like, so there's that element to it. So also you combine, the fact that I see that most of these boutique labels love just dumping their stuff on Tubi for free. Like, free all year long for years running. You know what I mean?
The hard part, behind the scenes, Tubi is one of the only streaming services that actually kind of returns decent money.
Well, that's good. That's good to know. But what I'm saying is that's also for somebody that's dealing with the economy, when they're weighing out whether they should buy the new 4K release of, House by the Cemetery, right? They might say to themselves, well, I got the Blue Underground whatever set, and it's also available on Tubi, and things are a little tight right now.
Right.
You know what I mean? So how do you see that impacting these boutique genre cult and horror labels? Or but are they impervious to it? Tell me.
They're certainly not impervious to it. I think we're at a very dangerous tipping point, actually. We are, I did a cursory count. This is certainly not gospel or me saying it as a fact, but I tried to count every single active boutique Blu-ray company in the world a couple months ago. And just going off of if they had at least one new release in the previous 6 or 8 months, I don't remember the number that I used, I got up to almost 150 different companies. Not just labels that are like, Vinegar Syndrome has like 5 different labels that they put stuff out on with their VSAs, VSUs, but Vinegar Syndrome as a whole is one company. And if you count all of the active labels that have done at least one title, more than 150 labels, most likely, in the entire world. And that, to be frank, is too many in the market that we're in. We are not seeing sales occur at the rate that we were even in 2020 and 2021, because let's be honest, back then, houses were getting stimulus checks a couple times.
Yeah, right.
And
right. I mean, folks were encouraged to like spend money on that kind of stuff to keep the economy going.
And many people that saw an explosion of sales thought that would continue in the near future, because all of these brand new fans to physical media, it did continue for a little bit, but then it was not impervious because the economy continued to tank and people had to make that tough choice. And let's be honest here, this is the entertainment industry. This is not the survival industry. So this is unfortunately going to have to be one of the things that have to go if you're worrying about paying for clothes for your kids or paying for gas to get to work to be able to afford groceries for your family. And I don't know about everybody else, but for me, my grocery bills have almost doubled in the last 2 years. Literally.
It's crazy. It's crazy, Ryan. And I'm really glad that you summed it up that way as well. Like, that was a great way of explaining it. And I think that, and we saw that also with the theater component last year, right?
Yes.
Like, last year saw this complete anomaly of huge swaths of people that rarely go to the movies. They went to the movies last summer, because it was like the in thing to do. And when they did that, I read a news article about when everybody was like going to the movies, like vinyl and toy and like DVD and Blu-ray and 4K sales dipped.
Yep.
Because people don't have the disposable income for multiple like hobbies, if that's the word that you want to use. You know what I mean? They just don't have the financial bandwidth to, kind of keep all these markets going. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, and of course we haven't even touched on, the implosion of comic books, because that's a whole other discussion, but that plays into it, right?
Of course.
That's another kind of a lot of the people that are into vinyl and comic books and movies, they're all kind of the same, even though some might be more into one than another.
It's a big Venn diagram.
Right. That's a great way of putting it. So everything is impacted, So anyway, man, like, that's really a great way to. Did you have any more questions for me? This has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you having me. We've covered it all.
Well, one thing that we didn't, that I've really wanted to hear about, is the choice to film simple on an iPhone. I mean, that is a huge choice.
Okay, this is great, because back then it actually was. Now it's not.
Right.
The iPhones now are all considered the professional grade cameras.
Exactly.
Now, the iPhone X was the first iPhone that had the capability to shoot professional grade industry, what's considered professional by the industry standards.
Right.
The iPhone X was the first one that could do that, but with asterisks, only under certain conditions.
Exactly.
Okay. So I had to do a lot of tests. So I did a lot of tests before we shot, and there was like this buttery wavy thing it would do sometimes in conjunction with like this gimbal thing we bought. I mean, there was some trial and error that I needed to get out of the way before Christina came over. Now, here's the thing. Christina and Carmen did not know we were shooting this on an iPhone. I shot footage and had a buddy of mine who cut some of my pieces, Craig Moorhead. He put together like a really nice black and white sizzle reel that I showed Christina and Carmen when they first arrived.
Love that.
Being her first like project in a long time, and I kind of I kind of framed the whole thing as a working vacation. You know, Christina really didn't want a lot of other people around, regardless.
Right.
So that also like benefited why she was cool. And look, once they saw the like sizzle reel, they were really excited. And but yeah, so that was the decision. But also, here's the thing: is that I also looked at shooting with I forget the name of the camera. It was a DSLR. A buddy of mine in Los Angeles had it, and he was gonna like let me have it for the shoot. And I played with a similar camera in town that somebody let me use, but it wasn't going to have the run and gun capability.
Right.
So see, at the end of the day, the iPhones have the run and gun. The autofocus is to die for.
It's great.
So like when you're having some of these DSLRs and stuff, like, and you want to get these great shots, you got to you need another person. Like it's like a production. But the other thing was that with the iPhone X, if I played around with it and I made sure that I could get great professional footage, also it worked in regard to us looking like we were tourists. Because St. Augustine is loaded with people walking around with cameras. Like, I mean, there were plenty of times when people would ask me and Christina and Carmen to take pictures of them while we were shooting.
Wow.
And Christina called it karma, that it was our karmic responsibility to take pictures of them because we were like wandering around getting away with murder, just like making a movie. You know what I mean? Under everybody's noses.
Love that.
So that was the impetus for that. Now, if you remember earlier, I talked about how we shot like a documentary's worth of footage.
Oh yeah.
Some of that was because of the iPhone footage didn't look so good, because like the iPhone X like died inside, like interiors. That was like really touch and go with the iPhone X.
Interesting.
So and when that camera came out, like people in the industry that were getting really nervous about the iPhone technology. Right. That was the main thing that they would point out was that like, well, when you can't use it for interiors, like they were like really like relieved at that. You know what I mean? Like that was gonna like Apple wasn't gonna like solve that problem as soon as they could,
right.
But so a lot of the interior footage, had to go. Like just it looked like crap. And there was some stuff that we shot and then went back and reshot. It was too grainy. So do you remember a shot of her in a wax museum?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a promo shot of her in the wax museum, but it's not actually in the movie. But in the movie, the first day we shot at the wax museum, the footage was like grainy. I mean, it was too sandy. And There was another shot interior at a museum where it was the same way. And we went back out and we reshot some stuff.
Interesting. There's probably I think it was only one shot. It looked like I think it was made to look like a crane shot, but it was probably a drone or something like that.
Yeah.
Is that how you guys pulled that one off? Was a drone?
So there's 6 shots in the movie that are stock, that were purchased, that were like stock shots. So like a local cinematographer, God, what's his name? He had a couple of them that like we could get from him that we used for St. Augustine. Then I found a couple other ones that I used for some transition shots. But we had a guy come out with a drone, and he did the shots of Christina walking on the beach with the chair at the end.
The chair. So beautiful.
Yeah. So that guy, so that drone shot was actually one that we shot. That the other there's an aerial shot of the bridge leading to St. Augustine. That shot, and there's another like boom, like almost like a crane shot in downtown St. Augustine. That was from a local cinematographer, and we went ahead and purchased those from him. And then there were like 3 other shots that I used from like one of those like Pond 5 or something. And I just want to put it out there, man, those sites are awesome. And they are a great asset to filmmakers. They save filmmakers money while putting money into other filmmakers' pockets. They are a great resource. So
I will take this moment as we wrap this up then to not to say that ideas are not what make things happen, but to point out to anybody that feels like they have a good idea, you just got to go out there and do it. I mean, filming with an iPhone X in a town like St. Augustine and using stock footage for something that you might be able to enhance your vision a little better. It just takes the initiative to get it done. And in a film like this, that's in a way fairly experimental. And now we're seeing a boutique physical media release for something that you created. I mean, congratulations to you, sir. This is a huge accomplishment. I'm so happy with you. The movie itself is great, but just everything that you were able to pour into this, it's magical.
Well, thank you so much. And I do want to add on what you just said is that in this business now, in the year 2024, is that like you have to keep pushing the boulder up the hill.
Oh yeah.
Like you have to keep creating content like this professionally. This me going ahead and doing this. While I was, developing and working on other projects and such. I mean, this was, something that really opened additional doors for me.
Right.
It still opens doors for me. Like I do, I do short films and stuff like that while I'm, ping ponging scripts around, in Hollywood, whatever. And you really, if you want to stay sane in this business, like you've got to produce some things yourself, or you're going to be, I think the last time that I heard it was like 97% of projects that are developed, like never get made.
Right.
So, you have to, a lot of people become extremely bitter. A lot of people become extremely bitter in this business. And, especially if they're gambling on, being in that 3%, and chances are that's not going to happen.
Absolutely.
Right? You wouldn't go to Vegas with those odds. There's no reason to bet your happiness on it. And with the democratization of technology, there's no excuse to not make a proof of concept short for a script you have. There's no excuse to not go out and make something to put out on social media. Like I do short films that I've done short films that have been proof of concept pieces. I've done short films that have been for the festival circuit. I've done short films that are just to to put out on Facebook, during some holidays like Halloween and Christmas for, my like Facebook Cinemaniacs and friends or whatever.
Right.
You just have to produce, you have to produce content in this environment. You know what I mean? And
Constantly.
I just, one other thing that I wanted to talk about the production was the score by David Wingo.
It's so perfect. It flows with every scene amazingly.
And here's a great story behind that. Is that I knew David from years back, and of course he did the score for that show Barry on HBO, but he also did a bunch of stuff for David Gordon Green,
right?
And like Manglehorn, and he did Jeff Nichols stuff like Take Shelter and the upcoming Bike Rider, and David Wingo's done a lot of stuff. And I reached out to him, and he said he was busy, and he said he really loved the like still. I sent him a bunch of stills, and he goes, "Man, I really like this, but I'm really busy right now." He goes, "But you know what?" He goes, "I did a score for something like when I was just starting out years ago, this film that didn't go anywhere. It was this little like documentary." And he goes, "And I've got the rights back to it. And it's always bugged me that it couldn't be used for something." And he sent me that score. And let me tell you something. If we had spent $1 million, we could not have gotten a score that was more perfect for that film in every way.
Fully agreed.
That was absolutely uncanny, the way that happened. And, if something else for you is that, years back, we've been talking about Dario Argento, but years back, I actually did some consulting work on David Gordon Green's proposed remake of Suspiria.
Oh boy, yeah.
The aborted remake of Suspiria. I worked on that for only 9 days with the guy that was working on the script was an old buddy of mine from film school. But we went back and forth on that for about 9 days as he was getting the latest draft of the script together for whatever the production company was, in Rome. It wound up not happening, but I thought you might find that interesting.
Very interesting. I mean, there's so much that has changed in that side of the industry as well. I mean, the films that were being made even 10 years ago aren't able to get funding nowadays. And it's sad. And I'm happy that some people are finally starting to talk about it. Like we had that quote from the Oscars this year of instead of, a $200 million movie, let's make $10-20 million movies or whatever the exact quote was. It's so important that we focus on things like that.
And I mean, the issue with that is that they do make those movies, but they don't get any advertising, and they just show up on one of these streaming platforms, and they have A-list talent.
Yep.
Like there's so many $20 to $40 million movies that just like wash up. And here's the issue with that. And I was talking to somebody about this the other day, is that we have, take Adam Driver and Liam Hemsworth, right? Like, the guy that played Thor.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that guy, super talented guy, seems genuine, nice guy. Like, his movies outside of Thor and Marvel don't draw a dime. Like, they're bombs. Like, they're flops.
Even Furiosa.
Like, Adam Driver's movies are almost unanimously flops.
Right.
And you have this bizarre system where pre-sales and getting financing, these actors are like getting movies and greenlit, but it doesn't mean anything to audiences when they're actually released. right? So like Adam Driver and Liam the Hemsworth can just go from box office flop to box office flop, and they can get additional projects financed on pre-sales, but then when the films are actually released, they don't make any money. Right? Like in actual reality, outside of that bubble, when they're advertised, right? Or when they show up on Netflix, people aren't watching them. You know what I mean? Like, I guess
very true.
Hemsworth had those Extraction movies that did all right on Netflix, but you have the reason I'm telling this story is that you have an industry that's in complete turmoil, right? Where all the things that like used to work don't work, and it seems like things are like running counter to what reality actually is. And the reason that's happening is because like they're doing what should on paper work because that's what's worked in the past. Right?
Yep.
You know, like, oh, we have a big name actor, we make a big movie, you know, and so you'll see articles where people acknowledge things like, oh man, you know, there aren't any movie stars anymore. Like they say that, but they don't act on that reality right away. You know what I mean? Like they're still making movies as if there are movie stars, but these movie stars aren't drawing.
Not at all.
You know, and again, sometimes the movies aren't very good, but many times the movies are very good, right? But they just don't mean anything. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So I think when you see, and I'm using that, right, like extreme examples are great for educational purposes. I'm using that example as kind of, you know, what's going on in the industry right now. How we just talked a little bit ago about how, you know, with no advertising whatsoever, like Hulu and Netflix put up Suits and, you know, Moonlighting, and they absolutely exploded, right? And like, meanwhile, you've got like a $30 to $40 million movie with Benedict Cumberbatch that shows up on Amazon Prime and no one watches it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of just, you know, what's right is left and what's left is right going on, you know? So even though people, and I am one of them, right, that will talk about the wild incompetence that runs rampant in Hollywood, right?
Right.
I do sympathize because there are genuine people in the business that are genuinely trying to navigate this perilous time. I do sympathize with them when literally every aspect about the business is completely doing a 360 and going against everything they've been taught or experienced for decades.
It's depressing. That's the big thing, is for a lot of people, it takes the wind out of your sails for anything that you're working on.
It takes the wind out of your sails, and I'm going to finish up here in 5 minutes. It takes the wind. It takes the wind out of your sails to, in my opinion. Okay, this is the easiest time to make movies. It's the worst time to make money making movies.
Well said.
And so, can people scratch the itch? Yes, that's a big win because of the democratization that we talked about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because the technology is available to everybody. I don't want to dwell on that, but that's one part of it. Now, we're getting really good movies. We're still getting good cinema, okay? Overall, all right? There's some, you know, the best quality television ever has been being made. There's also lots of really bad stuff being made. Okay, I'm not going to say there's not, but there's always been a lot of bad stuff being made. Okay,
Yeah.
There's a lot of good stuff being made. Now, there's going to be peaks and valleys, right? When you have turbulent times, the valleys are always going to seem worse, right? The valleys are always going to seem worse, especially when you're in an era where everybody's commenting on everything in real time. You know what I mean?
And now with social media, everyone's a critic too, and you hear opinions no matter how hard you try not to hear them.
Everybody's a critic. And look, anybody that gets up, and here's another thing. Like, you've got these cottage industries of these people that get up every morning and look for a reason as to why, Kathleen Kennedy ruined their life. You know what I mean? They lost their job and their wife divorced them because Ray happened in Star Wars, and I just think that stuff is, when I look at the big, when you look at the big picture, there's a lot to talk about with, Disney and Marvel and Star Wars and all that. But at the end of the day, I grew up in a Disney valley. I grew up when every movie Disney put out was crap. Their TV show was a joke. And the theme parks was all they had going on until The Little Mermaid sparked an entire renaissance. Right? I was also there when, after, Pocahontas and the Hunchback of Notre Dame, after the Renaissance period ended, I was there when everybody was declaring Disney dead when that happened, right? And I was there when Toy Story came out and revolutionized Disney all over again. Here's the thing. Disney just had one of the biggest epic runs in the history of entertainment, right? And look, they were due for a downturn, and that's a whole nother discussion. You have, death by 1,000 cuts, whatever. But what I'm getting at is that there are peaks and valleys in the business, and the valleys just seem exacerbated due to all the other, elements that are going on right now in the world. You know what I mean? Sociopolitically, socioeconomically, right?
Yeah.
And but Disney making crappy movies back to back, that's not some historical anomaly.
No, we have evidence of that many times.
Right. We have plenty evidence of Disney making stinkers. You know what I mean? And look, they got super greedy after a huge run where they could do no wrong. They started believing their own hype, right? We've seen that happen before.
Right.
And, everything that rises must converge. It happens is part of the circle of life. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
So, but again, that's gonna turn around. Didn't they just have some huge hit over the weekend with Inside Out 2 or something?
Did very well, yeah.
Right. They've got X-Men and Deadpool coming. Things are gonna turn around there. I think we've had, I want to end on a positive note here, because we have in streaming, you can say what you want about Netflix, you can say what you want about Amazon, about Hulu, but we have more access to high quality international programming from all around the world than we've ever had. You know what I mean? There is so much, there is in documentaries. There is so much high quality programming available. Now, what I am a little concerned about, and hey, maybe this works to your business's advantage, is that, the one thing that Amazon's actually pretty good at this, but Netflix is atrocious and Hulu doesn't want to push it. But, you don't have, in terms of the older movies, they're kind of like lacking. But, does that work to Kino Lorber and all these boutique labels benefit that the streamers don't offer these old movies?
I mean, yeah, maybe. I got just a few months ago, I had my first in-person, in my house interview with a minor celebrity. And one of the things we talked about was he walked in and was just astonished that I had so many physical media releases. And he said, well, how many of these are on streaming? And he was just completely baffled when I said, honestly, maybe 35 to 40% of them are on streaming right now. And he was like, oh, really? And I had to explain, yeah, a lot of these are films people just, they're not Sam Peckinpah, they're not a Clint Eastwood film. And so because of that, they get sort of relegated to the back seat, and they're not, focused on for licensing, and therefore boutiques put them out. They sell decently there, but at the same time, it is a niche of a niche. And so if a boutique can sell it to 1,500 people, maybe that's a smash success for them. But if it was on streaming and even 3 times that, to say 4,500 people watch that, that is a massive failure.
Right. And I mean, I think that is, is somewhere where the boutique labels could pick up slack. But again, you know more about those numbers than I do. But, you can certainly, I think the sweet spot was a few years ago when we had on demand.
Yeah.
I think on demand on Comcast was the sweet spot because, young kids wanting to get into movies that had the hunger, they could just pick up the controller and say Jack Nicholson, and you would have 7 movies to choose from. You could say Woody Allen. You could have 20 movies to choose from. You know what I mean? You could literally pick a name out of a hat and you would have a wide selection to choose from. That's the closest to the digital version of the Video Magic video store that I talked about at the beginning of the conversation that I've experienced in the modern age.
I think that and local libraries, I think, are some of the best ways that we could have this type of a conversation, because we don't talk about libraries enough.
Yeah, local libraries have really good selections. I'm glad you mentioned that. When I was living in a studio, I love that studio. In downtown Jacksonville, it's within walking distance from the library, and I was finding some great stuff in there to fill the gaps. Not just to fill the gaps, but also they would get physical copies of classics, more obscure stuff, lots of foreign stuff, lots of BBC series, not the poorly produced BBC series from the 60s and 70s, but the more modern produced ones. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely know what I'm talking about there. But, I use the library to, revisit Black Adder, the public library is a great spot, but you know what? Having, people got to have the hunger, right? And that's one thing that we can't expect from people, is to have the same hunger that we do, because it's a passion for us. You know what I mean? It's a passion for us. Yep. I think that those that want to find it will find it between all the streaming platforms, but there's more people than ever before that are watching foreign movies and foreign produced content because of Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu than ever before, dude. Ever before. Easily. Yeah. So I give them props for that. They did more to make world cinema something that was commonplace. They did more than any film festival, than any Academy Award show, any Golden Globe show, any entertainment magazine ever did. People that I never in a million years would hear saying, "Oh, I'm watching this new South Korean show." You know what I mean? People of all walks of life that aren't even cinephiles. They watch shows, procedurals. They watch like those. You know how in like France and in Belgium and Poland they'll produce those like limited series that are like somebody gets killed and blah 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 blah. The procedurals. You know what I mean? Like people watch those that are just regular average Joes and Janes that could care less about this entire discussion we've had, and they're ingesting the content from all these different countries, from all these different cultures. So I mean, I want to end on a positive note, talking about that, and and the fact that these boutique labels and this physical media is fills in some much needed gaps, but there's obviously a lot of turbulence and a lot of whirlwinds. Headwinds in the world today that are going to be impacting not just this, but also all sorts of things. And I certainly want to thank you for having me on. This has been a dynamite conversation. I know you're going to have to edit it. I hope I didn't give you too much work to do in that regard. But hey, I've been on fire, my man. Start talking about movies, the way that we have, and sparks will fly.
Amen. Yeah, this has been an incredible conversation, Damian. I would love to have you back on someday. The editing, don't worry about it. It's my favorite thing, especially when I get to hear some of your waxing poetic again. As we were talking about leaving on a high note, please remember Severin slate for this sale. We've got a couple titles with Damian's hands all over it. We've got Opera that Christina was in. Christina now is on the special features for the first time in literally decades. And then we of course have the other one that is a little more personal for you, Simple Like Silver, which again I will say, watched, loved, beautiful looking. If you're into any sort of experimental cinema, this is probably going to be one for you. It's one of those that leaves you with a lot of questions, a lot of thoughts. It will linger with you after you watch it, and just congratulations. It's a really well done film, and I'm honored to have been able to speak with you about it.
Thank you. The great reviews we got for it were deeply appreciated, and that also has an audio commentary track by me and has an audio commentary track by Christina Marcellik.
Perfect. I appreciate your time, and we'll let you get back to enjoying your evening in Pakistan there, sir.
All right. And hey, Brian, if you find time tonight, watch a good movie.
I will do my best. Everybody listening, do the same.
All right, later.
If you're looking for more horror outside of the mainstream, look no further than Unsung Horrors, a podcast about underseen horror movies. I'm Lance.
And I'm Erica. Every other week, we'll cover a horror movie with fewer than 1,000 views on Letterboxd. We'll even give you double feature recommendations to pair with the movies we discuss.
From gothic to shot on video, from slashers to comedies, from giallo to J-horror, we'll cover all the subgenres. So join us as we unearth these hidden gems of horror.
Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all at Unsung Horrors, available wherever you listen to podcasts. And part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Thank you for listening to the Disconnected Podcast. There's one big thing that you could do to help the show, and that is to leave a rating and review on the podcast service of your choice. Thank you.
Hello! This is Matt.
And Emily from Scarecrow Video in Seattle, Washington. Did you know that we have the largest video collection in the world? We have over 146,000 titles and growing. That's over 3 times more than Netflix, Amazon, Max, and Hulu combined.
Plus, Scarecrow now offers rent-by-mail service throughout the U.S., so check out scarecrowvideo.org for details. You can catch Emily and I, or Matt and I, if that was going to be you saying that, on our bi-weekly YouTube show, Viva Physical Media, for video recommendations and so much more.
See ya!
Bye!